This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I've been debating whether to post this for weeks now. Part of me thinks writing it down might make things worse, but I need someone to know what happened to me. I can't sleep. I keep the blinds closed. I check the locks constantly. I haven't answered my phone in almost 3 weeks. It started about 2 months ago. I'm a freelance photographer specializing in landscape and cultural photography. I've always been drawn to locations with rich folklore. It gives my photos context, something deeper than just pretty scenery. I'd been hearing whispers about the Four Corners region, and specifically some Navajo legends that could make for an amazing photo essay. I know now I should have done more research before going. I should have respected boundaries, but I didn't, and I'm paying for it. I drove out to Window Rock, Arizona, staying at this rundown motel just outside Gallup because it was cheaper. The place was nothing special, peeling wallpaper, that musty smell old motels have, a mattress with a permanent dip in the middle. But it was close enough to where I needed to be, and I was only planning to sleep there anyway. Through some local contacts, I managed to arrange a meeting with a woman named Elsie Nez, who agreed to be my guide. She was maybe in her 60s, with deep creases around her eyes and this quiet dignity about her. We met at a small cafe in Window Rock. I remember she ordered tea but barely touched it. I started asking about local legends, sacred sites I could photograph, the usual stuff. Then I made the worst mistake of my life. I straight up asked her about skinwalkers. The change in her was immediate. Her face went completely blank, and she set her cup down with a sharp click. "We don't speak of those things," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Words have power here, names especially. To speak of them is to call them." I thought she was being superstitious, maybe playing it up a bit for the outsider. God, I was such an idiot. Apologized and tried to move the conversation to safer topics, but the damage was done. Before we parted ways, she agreed to continue helping me, but her final words to me that afternoon were, "Be careful tonight. Keep your doors locked. Don't answer if you hear your name." I laughed it off, actually laughed. That night at the motel, I uploaded my scouting photos to my laptop and planned routes for the next day. Around 11, I noticed something odd. The typical nighttime noises had stopped. No crickets, no distant highway sounds, nothing. Just this heavy silence that seemed to press against the windows. Then I heard it, a high-pitched whistling sound coming from somewhere outside. It wasn't constant, just these sporadic bursts that made the hair on my arms stand up. I told myself it was just the wind, but deep down, I knew wind doesn't sound like that. Around midnight, this horrible smell seeped into my room. It was like burnt hair mixed with something metallic, like copper or blood. I checked the vents, thinking maybe something had died in there, but couldn't find anything. Eventually, I stuffed a towel under the door and tried to sleep with my jacket over my face to block the stench. I must have fallen asleep at some point because I woke up suddenly around 3 in the morning. Something had called my name. It wasn't loud. It was like someone standing right next to my bed had whispered "Tyler" directly into my ear. I sat up, heart pounding, but of course no one was there. The smell was gone and the silence had lifted. Normal night sounds had returned. I convinced myself it was just a dream and eventually fell back asleep. The next morning, I went out to my Jeep and found 3 long scratches down the driver's side door, deep ones that went all the way to the metal. There was also this grayish ash scattered around the tires. It wasn't there when I parked. When I met Elsie later that morning, she took one look at my face and knew something had happened. Before I could even tell her, she asked, "Has it used your voice yet?" The way she said it made my stomach drop. Not if, but has it. I told her about the sounds, the smell, the scratches. She nodded like this confirmed something. She told me we needed to see someone else, a medicine man named Yazzie, who lived about 30 minutes away. But first, she wanted to show me a particular place, Yatahe's Watch, this jagged rock formation that was supposed to be good for photographs. I should have said no. Everything in me was screaming to get in my Jeep and drive back to Albuquerque, but I didn't want to seem like a coward. Plus, it was broad daylight. What could happen? Yatahe's Watch was beautiful in a desolate way. Red rocks jutting up against the blue sky, scrubby vegetation clinging to life in the cracks. As I set up my tripod, Elsie walked the perimeter of the area, sometimes stopping to touch the ground or look intently at something I couldn't see. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the rocks, Elsie suddenly grabbed my arm. "We need to leave, now." Her fingers dug into my skin with surprising strength. That's when I noticed the footprints, if you could even call them that. They looked almost human, but wrong somehow, too long and narrow, with what looked like claw marks at the ends. And they were fresh, pressed into a patch of sandy soil near where I'd been standing. We hurried back toward my Jeep, but Elsie kept looking over her shoulder. About halfway there, she suddenly stopped dead in her tracks. I followed her gaze and saw it. About 50 yards away, partially hidden behind a boulder, was something. It was tall and unnaturally thin, standing on what looked like human legs but bent all wrong. Its upper body was obscured, but I caught a glimpse of what looked like antlers or branches extending from its head. It was absolutely still, watching us. "Don't run," Elsie whispered. "Walk steady. Don't look at it directly." We continued toward the Jeep, and that's when I heard it, my own voice, calling out from behind us. "Elsie, hey, wait up. I found something cool back here." It was my voice, exactly how I sound, but I hadn't said a word. Elsie grabbed my hand and squeezed it hard. "Don't answer. Don't turn around." The thing called out again, this time with a slight edge of frustration in my voice. "Guys, seriously, come check this out." We reached the Jeep, and as I fumbled with the keys, I made the mistake of looking back. The creature had moved closer, and now I could see it more clearly. It had the basic shape of a man, but everything was wrong. Too tall, too thin, joints bending in impossible ways. Its face was the worst part. It looked like deer features stretched over a human skull, with black, empty eyes and teeth that were far too numerous and sharp. As soon as it realized I was looking at it, it smiled. That's the only way I can describe it. This thing smiled at me with too many teeth. Then it started coming toward us, moving in this jerky, unnatural way, like stop-motion animation. We got in the Jeep and I floored it, spraying gravel as we tore out of there. In the rearview mirror, I could see it standing in the middle of the road, watching us go. I was planning to drive Elsie home and then get the hell out of Arizona, but she insisted we go straight to Yazzie's place. The sun had fully set by then, and driving those back roads in the dark was terrifying. Several times I thought I saw something running alongside the Jeep, just out of the headlights' reach. We got lost twice. Roads that Elsie swore should have been there weren't, and landmarks she recognized were in the wrong places. It was like the landscape itself was shifting around us. At one point, we ended up back at Yatahe's Watch, even though we'd been driving away from it for at least 20 minutes. The third time we tried, We finally found Yazzy's place, a small house with a traditional hogan nearby, surrounded by juniper trees. As we pulled up, 3 dogs started barking furiously. When I got out of the Jeep, they went absolutely crazy, lunging against their chains and snarling at me specifically. Yazzie was an elderly man with deep-set eyes and hands gnarled from arthritis. He listened to our story without interruption, occasionally nodding. When Elsie finished explaining, he looked at me for a long time. "It has your voice," he finally said. "That is not good. It means it has part of you already." He performed a ritual. I won't describe the details out of respect, but it involved cedar smoke, prayers in Navajo, and a mixture he had me drink that tasted bitter and made my tongue numb. Throughout the ceremony, the dogs outside kept barking and howling. About halfway through, we started hearing voices outside, first mine, then what sounded like a woman crying for help, then a child calling for his mother. Yazzie warned us not to respond, not to even look outside, but when I heard what sounded exactly like my mother calling my name in a terrified voice, I couldn't help myself. I went to the window and pulled back the curtain just a crack. Standing in the yard was me, an exact copy of myself, down to the clothes I was wearing. But as I watched, frozen in horror, my doppelganger's face split into that same terrible smile, and its body began to change, twisting and elongating into something that barely resembled a human anymore. Yazzie yanked me away from the window and shoved me back into the circle he'd made. The rest of the night is a blur of prayers, smoke, and the constant sounds of that thing outside, trying every voice it knew to get us to open the door. By dawn, it was gone. Yazzie told me the ritual would give me some protection, but not forever. "It knows you now," he said. "It has your scent, your name, your voice. It may follow you, even to the city." I thanked them both and left as soon as it was fully light. I drove straight back to Denver, only stopping for gas and to use the bathroom. I kept all the doors locked and windows up, even when I was inside the car. For about a week, I thought maybe I was safe. I threw myself back into work, tried to forget what happened. Then, 12 days after I got home, I got a voicemail from an unknown number. When I played it, there was just breathing at first, then my own voice whispering, "Let me in, Tyler. I've come so far to see you." That was 3 weeks ago. I've been staying with friends, changing locations every few days. I don't answer calls from numbers I don't recognize. I've covered all the mirrors in whatever place I'm staying. Sometimes at night, I still smell that burnt hair odor seeping in under the doors. Last night, my current host's dog started going crazy around 3 a.m., barking at the back door. When my friend went to check, she said there was nothing there, but she found ash scattered across the welcome mat. I don't know what to do. I don't know how long I can keep running. Sometimes I think I see it out of the corner of my eye, that too tall, too thin shape, watching me from across the street or through a window. And sometimes when I'm alone, I hear my own voice calling my name from empty rooms. I shouldn't have written this down. I shouldn't have shared this story. But I needed someone to know what happened in case one day I just disappear. If you ever find yourself in Navajo territory, please, I'm begging you, respect their customs. Don't ask about certain things. Don't say certain names. And if you hear your own voice calling to you when you're alone, for God's sake, don't answer. Story 2. I still can't bring myself to watch motivational speakers, not after Francis. It's been 3 years since that weekend in Montana, but sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, remembering the look in my friends' eyes when they surrounded us. People I'd trusted for over a decade. Our friend group had been tight since junior year of high school. 8 of us. Me, Hannah, Tina, Ellen, plus the guys, Chris, Jake, Mateo, and Dave. We'd been through everything together. Graduations, job struggles, breakups, parents dying. We had a standing monthly dinner and a group chat that never stopped buzzing. I thought I knew everything about them. I thought I could trust them with my life. Francis joined our group about 7 months before everything fell apart. He was Chris's new co-worker, and from the first dinner he attended, he was magnetic. Tall, with this perfect smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He had stories about backpacking through South America, working with refugees in Greece, building houses in rural communities. Everything he said made you lean in closer. I remember Hannah whispering to me after that first dinner, "Where has this guy been all our lives?" I nodded along, but something about him made my skin prickle. Maybe it was how perfectly he answered everyone's questions, or how he seemed to know exactly what each person wanted to hear. Within weeks, Francis had become essential to our group. When Hannah got laid off from her marketing job, Francis happened to know someone at a better company who was hiring. When Tina needed to move apartments with barely any notice, Francis showed up with 3 guys from his gym to help. When Dave's car broke down, Francis knew the best mechanic in the city who did the work for half price. I tried to ignore the unease I felt. Everyone loved him, and I didn't want to be the jealous friend. But slowly, things started changing. It was subtle at first. Francis would suggest where we should eat, and suddenly everyone agreed without discussion. Our usual pizza place became too greasy, and our favorite bar was too noisy. Instead, we'd end up at these expensive farm-to-table restaurants where Francis was always on a first-name basis with the owner. Then came the boundary violations. He'd casually put his arm around someone's shoulder during conversations. He'd comment on people's appearance, telling Hannah she should wear her hair down more often, suggesting Ellen should dress less corporate on weekends. Once, he showed up at my apartment unannounced with soup when I mentioned in the group chat I had a cold. I never gave him my address. But the real red flag came when Ellen broke up with her boyfriend of 2 years on Francis's advice. She'd mentioned some minor argument they'd had, and Francis immediately labeled it emotional manipulation and insisted she deserved better. Within a week, she'd ended things. When I asked her about it, she just repeated Francis's words like they were gospel. Then came the Montana trip. It was supposed to be our annual friend getaway, something we'd done for years. But this time, Francis suggested we try glamping in this remote spot he knew about, 5 hours from the nearest town. "It'll be a spiritual experience," he promised. "A chance to reconnect with nature and each other." I almost backed out. The knot in my stomach had become impossible to ignore. But when I mentioned maybe sitting this one out, the others acted like I was being ridiculous. "Come on, it'll be fun," Tina said. "Francis has everything planned." I didn't want to lose my friends, so I agreed. The drive out was beautiful. Montana in early June, everything green and blooming. We took 3 cars, Francis driving the guys in his SUV, me taking the girls in my sedan, and Jake bringing extra supplies in his truck. The mood was light, with us singing along to 90s hits and stopping for snacks at roadside stands. The campsite was picture perfect, a clearing surrounded by pines with a small stream nearby. The glamping tents Francis had arranged were already set up, complete with real beds and solar-powered lanterns. It looked like something from a magazine. But as we unpacked, I noticed Francis watching everything, directing where people should put their bags, assigning tents without discussion. When Hannah asked if she could take the tent furthest from the stream, she has a thing about water, Frances laughed and said, "Don't be ridiculous. You need to face your fears." She ended up in the tent closest to the water. That first evening seemed normal enough. We grilled food, drank beer, told stories around the campfire. But then Francis stood up and announced it was time for a spiritual prayer to honor the land. He had us all stand in a circle, holding hands. What started as an awkward silence turned into nervous giggles from a few of us. Francis shot them a look that made the laughter die instantly. Then he started chanting something, not in any language I recognized, just nonsense syllables that went on for several minutes. When it was finally over, Chris and Jake acted impressed, nodding seriously about the energy they felt. The rest of us exchanged uncomfortable glances, but said nothing. I wondered if I was the only one who felt like I was part of some bizarre cult initiation. I barely slept that night, listening to the sounds of the forest and wondering how I could suggest we all leave without sounding paranoid. By morning, I'd decided to fake a work emergency, but before I could say anything, Francis announced he was taking us to a special waterfall about 2 miles from camp. "It's sacred ground," he said, his eyes intense. "You'll feel transformed." The hike wasn't in any guidebook. Francis led us on what seemed like a game trail, sometimes pushing through dense underbrush. I stayed near the back with Tina and Ellen, while Hannah walked ahead with the guys. We climbed for over an hour before the sound of rushing water reached us. The waterfall was stunning, about 30 feet high, cascading into a deep, clear pool surrounded by mossy rocks. In another situation, I would have been taking photos and enjoying the view. But something about Francis's expression made my heart race. He was watching us with this expectant smile that didn't reach his eyes. "This is a place of power," he announced, his voice carrying over the sound of the water. "For centuries, people have come here to cleanse themselves and connect with something greater." Then he started taking off his clothes. "We're going in," he said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. All of us, naked, the way humans were meant to experience nature. Chris and Jake immediately began undressing. Mateo hesitated but followed when Francis nodded at him. Dave looked uncomfortable but took off his shirt. The 4 of us women stood frozen. I caught Hannah's eye, saw the panic there. "I'm not comfortable with this," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Francis's smile vanished. "This isn't about comfort, it's about trust and transcendence." He turned to the guys, now all in various states of undress. "They don't trust us." What happened next still replays in my nightmares. The guys formed a semicircle around us, blocking the path back to camp. Francis crossed his arms. "No one's leaving until everyone participates," he said calmly. "This is for your own good." Chris stepped toward Ellen, grabbing her wrist. "Come on, it's just skinny dipping," he said, but his voice was wrong, mechanical. Jake reached for Hannah's shirt. Mateo moved toward Tina. Dave hung back, looking conflicted, but didn't stop them. "Get off me," Ellen shouted, twisting away from Chris. I don't remember deciding to move. I just found myself shoving Jake away from Hannah with all my strength. He stumbled back, surprise breaking through whatever trance he was in. "We're leaving," I said, grabbing Hannah's hand. "Now!" Francis's face contorted with rage, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him. "You're ruining everything," he hissed. "After everything I've done for all of you." I couldn't recognize my friends anymore. These men we'd known for years, trusted, shared our lives with. They were strangers with familiar faces, all staring at us with blank eyes, waiting for Francis's next command. "Back off!" I screamed, my voice echoing against the rocks. Something in my tone made them hesitate. Those few seconds were all we needed. We ran, scrambling down the trail, branches whipping our faces, panic giving us speed. I heard them calling after us, Francis's voice rising above the others, but we didn't stop. We reached camp gasping for breath. Without discussion, we grabbed our essentials and piled into my car. I've never driven so fast down a dirt road in my life, convinced every moment that Francis's SUV would appear in my rearview mirror. We didn't speak for the first hour, just stared at the road with shell-shocked expressions. Then Hannah started crying, and the dam broke. We pulled over at a gas station and fell apart together, sobbing, shaking, trying to make sense of what had just happened. What was he doing to them? Tina kept asking. How did he change them like that? We called the other guys multiple times over the next few days. Jake and Mateo sent nearly identical text messages. Sorry things got weird. Francis says you overreacted, but he forgives you. Chris and Dave never responded at all. Our decade-long friendships dissolved in a single weekend. We filed police reports, but nothing came of them. What crime could we report? Attempted naked swimming? The cops looked at us like we were being dramatic. I still keep tabs on Francis from a distance. He's some kind of motivational speaker now, with a small but devoted local following. His Instagram shows retreats in the woods, groups of people with the same blank expressions our friends had that day. Sometimes I wonder how many of them ended up in the water. Hannah, Tina, Ellen and I still see each other, but things aren't the same. We're careful now, protective of our boundaries in a way we never were before. We don't discuss that weekend much, but I know they have the same questions I do. How did we miss the signs? How did we let someone infiltrate our lives so completely? And most haunting of all, how quickly would our other friends have moved from pulling at our clothes to something worse if we hadn't gotten away? I'll never understand how Francis managed to transform people I'd known for over 10 years into strangers within months. Sometimes I wake up convinced it was all a bad dream, that my real friends are still out there somewhere, waiting for me to find them again. But then I remember the look in their eyes at that waterfall, and I know the truth. Whatever made them my friends is gone, replaced by something Francis put there. And 3 years later, I still don't know what that something was. Story 3. I still have nightmares about that night 3 months ago. My therapist says writing it down might help. So here goes. I'm not looking for explanations. I've heard plenty of those already. I just need to get this out. It was supposed to be a simple drive. Just a quick trip to deliver some paperwork to our company's satellite office in Fairbridge, about 2 hours from where I live. I should have checked the weather more carefully. The forecast mentioned possible snow, but nothing major. Nothing like what actually happened. I remember leaving the office around 3 in the afternoon. The sky was already darkening. You know how winter days are so short. A few flurries started coming down as I pulled onto the highway, but nothing concerning. I had my trusty Honda Civic, half a tank of gas, and a podcast to keep me company. I even remember feeling kind of peaceful watching the light snow against the gray sky. About an hour into the drive, things changed, fast. The snow went from gentle flakes to a thick curtain in what felt like minutes. The wind picked up too, howling against my car. Soon I couldn't see more than 20 feet ahead, even with my high beams on. The highway had emptied out. No cars ahead or behind me. That should have been my first warning sign. I slowed down to maybe 20 miles per hour, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. Every gust of wind pushed my car sideways. The road markers were disappearing under the snow, and I realized I was the only idiot still driving in this mess. After another 30 minutes of white-knuckle driving, I spotted a small turnout area, just a widened shoulder with what looked like a few feet of space before the tree line. I decided to pull over and wait for the worst to pass. The second I stopped and put the car in park, a wave of relief washed over me. I texted my roommate that I was waiting out the storm, turned the engine to idle to keep the heat going, and settled in. That's when I first heard it. A soft sound against the driver's side window, like something brushing against the glass. I figured it was just snow or maybe some ice, but then it happened again, more deliberately. A scraping noise. Still, I told myself it was branches or debris being blown by the wind. As the storm got worse, it got darker. By 5:30, it was pitch black outside, the snow reflecting my headlights back at me like a wall. I couldn't see the trees anymore, couldn't even tell where the road was. Just white and black, swirling together. I must have dozed off because I jerked awake suddenly. The clock on my dashboard read 7:12. Something had woken me, a sound. I held my breath and listened. Nothing but the idling engine and the howl of the wind. Then, a tapping. From the trunk, my heart started racing. I told myself it was ice forming, cracking, shifting, but it wasn't. It was rhythmic, deliberate, tap, tap, tap. Then the sound moved, around the back of the car, along the passenger side. I twisted in my seat, straining to see through the windows, but the snow was so thick and the windows were fogging up despite the defroster. I wiped a circle clear on the passenger window and peered out. Nothing but darkness and swirling snow. The next sound made me freeze, the distinct jiggle of the door handle. Something was trying to get in. I hit the lock button again, even though I knew the doors were already locked. My mouth went completely dry. "Hello?" I called out, my voice embarrassingly shaky. "Is someone there?" No response, just another jiggle of the handle, harder this time. I grabbed my phone, 2 bars of service. I dialed 911 but got a busy signal, tried again, same result. The blizzard must have been causing emergencies all over the county. That's when I heard it, a voice, outside my car. "Hey, open up, I'm freezing out here." My blood turned to ice. It was my sister's voice, my sister who lives in Arizona, my sister who I'd just texted with that morning. The voice was perfect, the same pitch, the same slight southern drawl she never lost from our childhood. But something was wrong. The cadence was off, like someone who'd heard her speak but didn't quite understand how humans talk. "Katie," I whispered, knowing it couldn't be her, knowing it wasn't her. "Open the door," the voice said again. "Please, it's so cold." I pressed myself against the driver's side door, as far from the passenger side as possible. "Go away," I said, my voice breaking. "You're not my sister." A sound came then, a laugh that started like my sister's, but deteriorated into something brittle and wrong. It made the hair on my arms stand up. "Fine," the voice said, no longer even attempting to sound like Katie. "Have it your way." Then I saw it. At my driver's side window, the snow cleared just enough for me to make out a face pressed against the glass. Except it wasn't really a face, not a human one. It was long, too long, with sunken cheeks that had ridges like gills. Its skin was the color of old paper, yellowish and dry despite the wet snow. But the eyes, God, the eyes were the worst part. Huge and black and knowing, looking at me like I was already dead. I screamed and threw myself across the center console, away from the window. When I looked back, the face was gone, but I could hear movement around the car, something heavy dragging through the snow. something that occasionally rose up and placed what must have been hands on my car, testing the windows, the doors. The roof creaked as pressure was applied from above. Whatever it was on top of my car now. I could hear its weight shifting, metal groaning. I was trapped underneath it, a thin layer of metal and glass between us. "Go away!" I screamed, pounding the ceiling of my car. "Leave me alone!" The thing responded by pounding back, mimicking my rhythm exactly. Then that same brittle laugh. "Jason," it said, using my name for the first time. "Jason." Sing-song, playful, terrifying. I was shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone. I tried 911 again, still busy. I called my roommate, but it went straight to voicemail. The battery was at 18%. I turned it off to conserve what was left. For hours, literal hours, that thing circled my car. Sometimes I'd see glimpses of it through the snow, tall, so much taller than a person should be, with limbs that bent at wrong angles. Sometimes it would disappear completely, and I'd think maybe it had left, only for that tapping to start again somewhere else on the car. It whispered things to me. My name, my sister's name, my mother's name, names of people I work with, all in that same wrong voice that was almost right, but not quite. At one point, it started scratching at the driver's side door. Long, continuous scrapes that I was sure were leaving marks. I couldn't look. I was curled up on the passenger seat by then, eyes squeezed shut, hands over my ears. I must have fallen asleep from sheer exhaustion, because the next thing I knew, light was filtering through the snow-covered windows. Morning. The storm had died down. The only sound was my engine, still idling. My gas light had come on. I sat up slowly, every muscle screaming from being tensed all night. I looked around, no sign of whatever it was, just silence and snow. With trembling hands, I cleared some snow from the windows. The world outside was transformed. At least 2 feet of snow covered everything. And there, leading from my car to the tree line, was a single line of footprints. Or not footprints exactly. They were elongated, almost like hooves, but too large, too deep in the snow. They went straight to the trees and then nothing. Like whatever made them had simply vanished. I tried to start my car properly, but the engine was dead. Too many hours idling, I guess. My phone had just 7% battery left. I called my roommate, got through this time. Told him where I was approximately. He said he'd call for help. I waited another hour in the freezing car before deciding to try walking. According to my GPS, there was a motel about a mile ahead. With the sun up and no sign of the creature, I figured it was worth the risk. The walk was brutal. The snow was deep, the wind still biting, but nothing compared to the terror of the night before. I kept looking over my shoulder, scanning the tree line, expecting to see that long, wrong face watching me. I made it to the motel. The owners took one look at my pale, wild-eyed face and brought me inside. They gave me coffee, called the police. I told them my car had broken down in the storm. I couldn't bring myself to tell them the rest. Who would believe me? The police went to check on my car. When they came back, they looked shaken. One of them took me aside and asked if I'd seen anything unusual during the night. I almost told him then, but I couldn't form the words. Instead, I asked what they found. "Probably just animal damage," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Your car roof is dented, some marks on the doors. We found some prints we can't quite identify, and some fur." "Fur?" I asked. He nodded. "Probably a bear," he said, but I could tell he didn't believe it. "There aren't bears in that part of the state. Haven't been for decades." My roommate picked me up that afternoon. On the drive home, he tried to explain it all away. Sleep deprivation, cold-induced hallucinations, stress. I let him talk. What else could I do? My car was totaled. Insurance covered it. Blamed storm damage. I bought a new one, an SUV this time, with four-wheel drive. I haven't driven in snow since. I call in sick if there's even a chance of flurries. My therapist says that's a normal response to trauma. She thinks I had some kind of panic attack, maybe even a psychotic break from the stress and isolation. But she didn't see those eyes. She didn't hear it say my name. She didn't see those tracks in the snow, leading nowhere. Every night, I check my locks twice. I sleep with lights on. And when the wind blows hard against my windows, I cover my ears so I don't have to hear that tapping sound, that almost right voice asking to be let in. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it's still out there, waiting on that forgotten stretch of highway for the next person stupid enough to drive in a blizzard. All I know is that I survived, and sometimes that has to be enough. But if you're ever caught in a sudden snowstorm on a lonely road, pull over somewhere public, somewhere with lights and people. And if you hear tapping on your window, if you hear a voice that sounds almost like someone you love, don't answer. Don't open the door, no matter what it says. Story 4. I still get chills thinking about last Thanksgiving. It's been almost a year, but I can't shake the feeling that if I hadn't looked out the window at that exact moment, things could have gone horribly wrong for me and my family. I was home from college for Thanksgiving break. I'm 22 and in my senior year at State. My friend Amber and I had this tradition of hitting the Black Friday sales that started Thursday evening. Our families are cool with it because we usually do the big Thanksgiving lunch instead of dinner. So by evening, we're free to brave the shopping chaos while everyone else is in a food coma. Last year, we planned to meet up at 6 in the evening when the stores first opened. I remember being excited because I had a whole list of gifts I wanted to buy, and there were some killer deals on laptops that I needed for my graphic design program. My parents were hosting that year, and the house was full of relatives. My grandparents, 2 aunts, my uncle, and my cousins. The usual holiday chaos. My mom kept asking if I was sure I wanted to go shopping instead of hanging out with family. "They came all this way to see you," she said, giving me that guilt trip look mother's perfect over the years. But she knew Amber and I did this every year, and honestly, after 6 hours of family time, I was ready for a break. Plus, my cousins are all younger, and there's only so many rounds of Monopoly I can play before losing my mind. Amber picked me up just before 6. The sky was already dark, and there was this light drizzle coming down that made everything look hazy under the streetlights. We headed to the Westfield Mall first. It was packed, cars circling for spots like vultures. We got lucky when someone pulled out right in front of us. Inside was absolute madness. Bodies pressed against each other, everyone clutching shopping lists and sale ads. The whole place smelled like perfume samples, cinnamon pretzels, and too many people in one space. We hit electronics first, where I managed to snag the laptop I wanted. Then we worked our way through the clothing stores, home goods, and finally ended at the bookstore where Amber wanted to get something for her dad. By 8 o'clock, we were done. My feet were killing me, but I felt victorious with my bags of discounted treasures. We decided to skip the food court. The lines were insane, and I knew there would be plenty of Thanksgiving leftovers waiting at home. The drive back to my house was quick, maybe 15 minutes. I remember looking out at the neighborhood as we pulled onto my street. Most houses still had lights on, some with cars parked out front for their own family gatherings. My street is usually pretty quiet, typical suburban setup with modest two-story homes, neatly trimmed lawns, and the occasional basketball hoop in the driveway. We pulled into my driveway around 8:15. I could see through the front window that the TV was on in the living room, probably my dad and uncles watching football. Amber helped me carry my bags to the door. "Want to come in for some pie?" I asked her. "My mom made like 5 different kinds." Amber shook her head. "I should get back. My grandma's staying with us and she's leaving early tomorrow." After she left, I juggled my shopping bags to the front door and let myself in. The house was warm and smelled like cinnamon and turkey. Most of my family had migrated to the living room, where my uncle was loudly explaining why his football team was having a rebuilding year. My mom spotted me from the kitchen and waved. "Did you get everything you wanted?" she asked, loading the dishwasher. I nodded, dropping my bags by the stairs. "Yeah, it was crazy but successful. Is there food left?" "Check the fridge. I made you a plate." I found the covered dish in the fridge and popped it into the microwave. While I was waiting, I wandered over to the front window and glanced out at the street. That's when I first noticed the car. It was parked directly across from our house, a dark sedan, maybe navy blue or black. Hard to tell in the street lighting. What caught my attention was that the engine was running. I could see the exhaust in the cold air, and the headlights were still on. It was wedged between my aunt's SUV and my grandparents' old Buick. At first, I didn't think much of it. Probably someone dropping, something off at a neighbor's house, or maybe even a relative of one of our neighbors. But as I stood there waiting for my food to heat up, I kept glancing back at the car. Something about it just felt off. The microwave beeped, but I stayed by the window. That's when the driver's door opened and a man got out. From my angle, I couldn't see his face clearly, just that he was tall, wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap. He stood by his car for a moment, looking up and down the street, then directly at our house. My stomach did this weird flip. I expected him to cross the street and come to our front door. Maybe he was lost and needed directions, or could be delivering something. But instead, he started walking along the edge of our property, toward the side of the house. Not the walkway to the front door, the side, where our fence has a gate that leads to the backyard. "Mom?" I called out, but the TV was too loud and she was running water in the kitchen. I hesitated for a second, debating whether to get someone's attention or keep watching. That's when this sickening realization hit me. The back door was probably unlocked. My family had been going in and out all day, bringing food from the grill, letting my little cousins run around the backyard. My dad is usually careful about locking up, but on busy holidays, things get overlooked. Instead of calling out again, I moved quickly through the dining room toward the back of the house. The layout of our home is pretty open. Living room and dining room connected, with the kitchen off to one side, and a short hallway leading to the back door. As I passed the dining table, still covered with desserts and coffee cups, I caught movement through the back window. A dark figure was approaching our back door. My heart jumped into my throat. I ran the last few steps to the door, and thank God I got there before he did. The door has these glass panels in the top half so you can see out into the backyard. Through the glass, I watched as the man walked up the 3 steps to our small back porch. He moved with this deliberate confidence, like he belonged there. My hands were shaking so bad I almost couldn't work the deadbolt. I clicked it into place just as his hand reached for the doorknob. The sound of the lock engaging seemed impossibly loud in my ears. For one awful moment, we made eye contact through the glass. I'll never forget his expression. Not surprise or embarrassment at being caught, but something cold and calculating. He had these pale eyes that didn't match the smile he suddenly forced onto his face. He raised his hand in what I guess was supposed to look like a friendly wave, then pointed to the door lock and shook his head, like I'd made some kind of mistake by locking it. My voice came back to me all at once. "Who are you?" I asked through the door, loud enough that I hoped my family would hear. He didn't answer. Instead, he took a step back, still with that awful fake smile, then turned and quickly walked off the porch and back around the side of the house. "Dad!" I finally shouted, my voice cracking. "Dad, come here!" My father and uncle both came rushing in from the living room. "What's wrong?" my dad asked, seeing my face. "There's a man. He just tried to come in the back door." I was pointing frantically toward the window. He came from a car out front, walked around the house, and tried to open the door. My dad immediately went to the door and looked out, while my uncle headed toward the front of the house. My mom and aunts had come into the kitchen now, too, asking what was happening. I was struggling to explain while watching my dad peer out into the darkness. "I don't see anyone," he said, turning back to me with a concerned expression. "Check the front," I insisted. He had a car running out front. My uncle called from the living room, "There's a car pulling away now!" We all rushed to the front windows. Sure enough, the dark sedan was driving off down our street, slowly at first, then accelerating once it reached the corner. "Did you recognize him?" my dad asked me. I shook my head. "No, never seen him before. He wasn't coming to the front door, Dad. He deliberately went around back like he knew." "Knew what?" "That it might be unlocked," I finished, my voice small. "Why would someone do that unless—" My mom put her arm around me. "You're shaking, honey." The realization hit me all at once, and I felt sick. "I think he followed me home from the mall." The room went quiet. My dad and uncle exchanged looks. "Did you notice anyone watching you while shopping?" my uncle asked. I tried to think back through the crowded stores, the packed parking lot. No, but there were so many people. He could have seen us loading bags into Amber's car, followed us back. My dad immediately called the police. They took their time coming. Apparently Thanksgiving night is busy for them. But an officer finally showed up about 40 minutes later. He took notes as I described the man and the car, but without a license plate number, he didn't seem optimistic. "Unfortunately, this happens during the holidays," the officer told us. "Thieves watch shoppers, follow them home, hoping to catch them unloading purchases and leaving doors unlocked." But something about his explanation didn't sit right with me. The man hadn't tried to break in while we were unloading the car. He'd waited, watched the house, and the way he looked at me through that door glass. It wasn't the look of someone just hoping to grab some packages. After the police left, my dad checked all the doors and windows twice. My uncle offered to stay the night, and my dad gratefully accepted. None of us said it out loud, but I think we were all thinking the same thing. What if he comes back? I barely slept that night. Every car that drove by, every creak of the house settling made me sit bolt upright in bed. I kept picturing those pale eyes looking at me through the glass, that smile that never reached them. The next morning, my dad found footprints in the soft soil of my mom's garden beneath my bedroom window. I'm still living at home now, finishing my last year of college remotely. My parents installed a security system the week after Thanksgiving. I've never gone Black Friday shopping again. And every night before bed, I personally check every lock in the house. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't looked out the window at that exact moment. If I hadn't gotten to the back door in time, would he have just walked right into our home full of family? What was he really after? The police never found him. And with the holiday shopping season coming up again, I can't help but think about how many other people might be followed home this year. Story 5. I've never told anyone about this. Not family, not friends, not even my therapist. How do you explain something that shouldn't exist? But I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here has seen something similar. This happened 3 years ago. I was living alone in Oak Ridge Valley. Beautiful place, seriously. My house sat at the edge of this big meadow with dense forest beyond it. The kind of place where people say, "I'd love to retire there," when they see pictures. I'd saved for years to buy it. Quiet neighborhood, only 5 other houses within a mile radius. It was my sanctuary. That morning started like any other. I was on my front porch with coffee, looking out at the meadow. It was early October, and usually the birds would be going crazy and leaves rustling everywhere. But that morning, nothing. Complete silence. At first I thought it was nice, peaceful, you know. But after about 15 minutes, it felt wrong. Like the volume had been turned down on the world. I remember checking my phone to see if there were weather alerts or something. Nothing. I even tapped my ears, thinking maybe I was having hearing issues. The silence was so thick it felt like pressure on my skin. I had this pair of binoculars I kept by the door for bird watching. I grabbed them and started scanning the tree line, thinking maybe there was a bear or something that had scared off all the wildlife. That's when I saw it. At first I thought it was just a weirdly shaped branch, a pale, dead branch sticking out from between 2 pines about 200 yards away. But then it moved, not like a branch would move in the wind. There wasn't any wind anyway, but deliberately. It rose up, then extended sideways. I focused the binoculars better and saw these, I don't know how else to describe them, except finger-like offshoots at the end. I kept watching, my coffee forgotten beside me. The branch twisted, revealing what looked like, God, I still get chills, a skull, not human, not animal either. It had these elongated horns curving back from the top, and these massive, empty eye sockets. The skull was connected to the branch arm thing, and as I watched, frozen, it turned directly toward my house. I dropped the binoculars. They hit the porch floor so hard the lens cracked. I ran inside, locked the door, and grabbed my phone to call 911. The call connected, and I started babbling to the operator about something in the woods, but the line went dead mid-sentence. I tried again, no signal. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the phone. I went to the window and peered out. The thing was moving across the meadow toward my house. It was huge, 8 or 9 feet tall at least. It looked like it was made of bleached bones. Not just the skull head and that branch arm, but its whole body, a mishmash of different animal bones stuck together somehow. There were strips of what looked like dried animal hide hanging off it in places. It didn't walk exactly, more like it glided, jerking forward in unnatural movements. I ran upstairs to get a better view from the bedroom window, hoping, like hell, I was hallucinating. But it was still coming, faster now. I grabbed my shotgun from the closet. I'd never fired it except at the range a couple times, but it was the only weapon I had. My hands were shaking so bad, I dropped shells all over the floor trying to load it. By the time I got back downstairs, the thing was at my front porch. I could hear it, this dry, scraping sound like bones dragging across wood. Then it started pounding on my door. Not knocking, pounding. The whole house seemed to shake. The door frame started to splinter on the third hit. I yelled that I had a gun, but it just pounded harder. The door was about to give. I ran to the kitchen, looking for somewhere to hide, when I remembered the basement. I grabbed a kitchen knife, stupid, I know, but I was in pure panic mode, and fumbled with the basement door just as I heard my front door shatter. The basement was unfinished, just concrete walls, a furnace, water heater, and some storage boxes. I shut the door behind me and locked it, then backed away into the darkest corner I could find. I was hyperventilating, trying not to make noise while gasping for air. I heard it enter my house. The scraping sound moved across the living room floor, then stopped. For maybe 30 seconds, there was nothing. Then a thud from directly above me, and another. It was searching, moving room to room. I was clutching the knife so hard my knuckles were white. Then the basement doorknob turned, once, twice. The lock held. There was this pause, and I thought maybe it would give up. The door exploded inward. I saw it fully for the first time. It had to duck to fit through the doorway. Its body was this nightmarish collection of different bones. Deer antlers forming a rib cage, what looked like cattle leg bones for its limbs, smaller animal skulls embedded in its torso. The main skull had no lower jaw, just that upper part with the horns, but somehow I could feel it was hungry. The eye sockets were empty, but seemed to fix right on me. It started down the stairs, each step making this awful, dry, cracking sound. I was trapped. The only exit was past it. I considered rushing it with the knife, but knew that would be suicide. That's when I noticed the smell, heating oil. My old furnace must have been leaking. The bone thing reached the bottom of the stairs. It raised its branch-like arm, revealing what looked like sharp bone fragments at the tips of its fingers. It took one step toward me, then another. The furnace kicked on with a mechanical click. In my peripheral vision, I saw the pilot light ignite. I don't remember deciding to move. I just did. I dove behind the furnace just as the oil ignited. There was a whoosh and then heat, intense, unbearable heat. I heard this horrible sound, like 1,000 pieces of chalk snapping at once, mixed with what I can only describe as a scream without a voice. The basement was filling with smoke and flames. I crawled toward the stairs, keeping low. The fire was spreading to the wooden beams in the ceiling. When I reached the stairs, I risked a glance back. The bone thing was thrashing in the flames, its body seeming to come apart. Pieces of it were blackening and crumbling. The skull was the last thing I saw before I scrambled up the stairs, those empty eye sockets somehow conveying rage and pain. I barely made it out of the house. My neighbors saw the smoke and had already called the fire department, but by the time they arrived, the house was nearly gone. I told them I had fallen asleep with a cigarette, too ashamed and afraid to tell the truth. Who would believe me? The fire chief later told me the basement had completely collapsed in on itself. They found nothing unusual in the rubble, just the remains of my furnace and water heater. No bones except a few that they assumed belonged to some animal that had gotten trapped in the house. I moved 2 states away after that, took the insurance money and bought a small apartment in the middle of a crowded city. I sleep with the lights on now. The thing is, I'm not convinced it died in that fire. Sometimes I dream about those empty eye sockets, and in the dreams, they're watching me from the edge of a forest. I've been researching similar encounters online. There are stories, not many, but enough, of people seeing bone creatures in remote wooded areas. Some call them wendigos, others skinwalkers or forest demons. 2 weeks ago, I found a deer skull on my welcome mat outside my apartment door. There was no note, no explanation, just the skull. I threw it in a dumpster 3 blocks away, but I can't shake the feeling that it found me. So I'm telling my story here because I need to know. Has anyone else seen the thing in Oak Ridge Valley? And if it's real, if it survived, what does it want with me? Story 6. I still remember exactly how the air smelled that morning. Like rain on hay and the earthy scent of the horse stables, with that hint of manure that you eventually stop noticing when you work at a farm. It was a Tuesday in early October, just cool enough that I'd thrown on my favorite gray hoodie before heading out to start the day. 7 months I'd been working at Green Pastures Farm Rehabilitation Program just outside Portland, and honestly, it had become the most fulfilling job I'd ever had. I was 32, 4 years clean myself. Getting that job as a mentor after my own battle with addiction felt like the universe giving me purpose. I'd been where these kids were, angry, lost, feeling like the world had already written them off. The farm program took in troubled teens and young adults, mostly those with addiction issues or minor criminal records, and gave them structure, responsibility, and skills. Working with animals has a way of healing people that therapy alone sometimes can't touch. Shauna had been with us for about 3 months when it happened. She was 19, rail thin with these intense green eyes and dirty blonde hair. She kept pulling back in a messy ponytail. Her file said she'd been using since 14, had some shoplifting charges, and a history of running away from foster homes. She didn't talk much those first few weeks, just did her chores with her head down. But slowly, she started to open up to me. Maybe it was because I didn't bullshit her. When she asked if getting clean was worth it, I told her some days it felt like the best decision I ever made, and other days I still woke up craving. She seemed to appreciate the honesty. By her 3rd month, we had something resembling trust. She'd started telling me about wanting to maybe become a vet tech someday. She was good with the animals, especially this old mare named Duchess that nobody else had patience for. I remember thinking she was finally turning a corner. That morning started like any other. I met with my small group of mentees at 7 for breakfast in the main hall. Shauna was quiet, but seemed okay. She even smiled when I complimented how well she'd been doing with Duchess's training. We finished breakfast and headed out to start morning chores, feeding animals, mucking stalls, the daily routine. I was in the tool shed grabbing some equipment when Richard, the program director, came in. His face told me something was wrong before he even opened his mouth. "Hey, we need to talk," he said, keeping his voice low. "2 police officers just showed up at the main office. They've got a warrant for Shauna." My stomach dropped. "What? For what?" "Armed robbery in Clackamas County from right before she came here. Convenience store holdup. They've got her on camera." I leaned against the wall trying to process this. She never mentioned anything like that. "They need to take her in. They're waiting in the office now." Richard looked genuinely sad. He'd seen enough kids get hauled away to know what it meant for their recovery. "I thought you should be the one to tell her. She trusts you. Might prevent her from doing something stupid." I nodded, my mind racing. Shauna had been doing so well, 3 months of progress about to be flushed away. But I also knew running would only make things worse. "Where is she now?" I asked. "Barn 3, cleaning out Duchess's stall." I found her exactly where Richard said, humming some song I didn't recognize while shoveling soiled hay. She looked up when I entered and must have read something on my face. "What's wrong?" she asked, immediately tensing. I took a deep breath. "Shauna, I need you to stay calm, okay? There are some police officers here." They have a warrant for your arrest from Clackamas County." Her face went completely blank, and for a second, I thought maybe she hadn't heard me. Then her eyes darted to the barn door behind me. "It's about that store, isn't it?" Her voice was barely audible. "They said something about a convenience store, yes." I stepped closer, speaking gently. "Listen, the best thing you can do right now is cooperate. Running will only make it worse. I'll help you through this. We can get you a good lawyer, and your progress here will count for something." She stood completely still, the pitchfork clutched in her hands. For a moment, I thought she was going to break down or bolt past me. Instead, she slowly nodded. "Okay," she said, setting the pitchfork against the wall. "Let me wash my hands first?" I felt a wave of relief. "Of course. Then we'll walk over together, all right?" She nodded again, moving to the small sink in the corner of the barn. I texted Richard that we were coming, trying to ignore the sick feeling in my gut. I hated seeing any of my kids get taken away, but especially one who'd been making real progress. We walked out of the barn side by side. The main office was about 200 yards away, across the central yard. It was a clear day, and a few other program participants were visible in the distance, working on the vegetable garden. Shauna was quiet beside me, her hands stuffed in her hoodie pockets, eyes fixed on the ground. "After you see the lawyer, call me," I told her. "I'll make sure someone feeds Duchess until you're back." She didn't respond, just kept walking. We were about halfway to the office when she stopped suddenly. "I need a minute," she said, her voice strange and tight. "Shauna, it's going to be okay. I promise." I never finished that sentence. In one fluid motion, she pulled her right hand from her pocket, and suddenly there was a knife pressed against my throat. Not a dinner knife or some flimsy pocket knife. A hunting knife with a serrated edge that I later learned she'd stolen from the tool shed weeks earlier and kept hidden. The cold steel pressed against my skin, and her other arm wrapped around me from behind, pulling me tight against her. "I'm sorry," she whispered in my ear, "but I'm not going back to jail." Everything moved in slow motion after that. I saw Richard step out of the office with the two officers. They spotted us immediately, and the officers' hands went to their weapons. Richard's face twisted in horror. "Stay back," Shauna screamed, her voice cracking. "I swear to God I'll cut her throat." The officers drew their guns, shouting commands I couldn't process. My ears were ringing, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. This couldn't be happening. Not Shauna. Not the girl who'd spent an hour the day before gently brushing Duchess and telling me about wanting to go back to school someday. "Shauna," I managed to say, trying to keep my voice steady despite the knife at my throat. "Please don't do this. Put the knife down and we can talk about this." "Shut up," she hissed, but I could feel her trembling against my back. "Just walk backward with me, slow." She began forcing me to step back toward the stables. By now, the commotion had drawn attention. Other staff members and participants were gathering at a distance, some shouting, others frozen in shock. One of the officers was speaking into his radio, calling for backup. "Ma'am, drop the weapon now," the taller officer shouted, his gun trained on us. "There's nowhere to go." "Stay back," Shauna screamed again. I could feel tears hitting my shoulder. She was crying. "I'll kill her. I swear to God I will." We continued the slow, terrifying backward walk. My mind was racing, trying to think of what to say, how to defuse this. I'd been trained in crisis intervention, but nothing prepares you for being the one with a knife at your throat. "Shauna, please," I tried again, keeping my voice as calm as possible. "They're going to shoot you. Is that what you want, after everything you've accomplished?" "I can't go back to jail," she sobbed. "You don't understand. I can't. I do understand, I said, feeling the knife press harder as we kept moving. But this isn't the way. They will kill you to save me. Please don't make them do that. For a moment, I thought I was getting through. The pressure of the knife eased slightly, but then one of the officers moved forward and the tension snapped back instantly. "Don't come any closer," she screamed, yanking me back so hard I nearly lost my footing. We'd reached the edge of the barn area now. I could see her plan. Get to the stables, maybe grab a horse. But there was no escape route that didn't end in disaster. The police had called for backup. More sirens wailed in the distance. "Shauna," I said, my voice breaking now, "think about Duchess. Think about your future. You can still have it. Please." I felt her breath ragged and hot against my ear. "They'll lock me up for years. I'll visit you. I'll help you. We'll get through it together." For a heartbeat, I thought it had worked. The knife trembled against my skin. Then the sound of a helicopter somewhere overhead seemed to snap something in her. "I can't," she whispered. And then louder, "I'm sorry." I felt her muscles tense, the knife beginning to move across my throat. In that split second, my whole life didn't flash before my eyes like people say. Instead, all I could think was, this can't be how it ends. Not like this. The gunshot was so loud it felt like my eardrums exploded. There was a wet spray against the back of my neck, and suddenly the pressure of the knife was gone. Shauna's grip released, and I stumbled forward, my hand going to my throat, where I felt something warm and wet. My blood? Hers? I couldn't tell. I turned around and saw Shauna crumpled on the ground. The knife had fallen beside her. There was a small, neat hole in her forehead, but the back of her head. I can't describe it. I won't. The officer who fired was still in position, his gun now lowered slightly, a look of grim certainty on his face. People were running toward us now. Someone was screaming. Someone else pulled me away, asking if I was hurt. I couldn't answer. I just kept staring at Shauna's body, at her eyes still open, looking at nothing. Those same green eyes that had lit up just yesterday when she told me about her dream of working with animals. Later, at the hospital, they told me I had a small nick on my throat. The knife had just barely broken the skin as Shauna fell. Physically, I was fine. A scratch that wouldn't even leave a scar. The doctors asked if I wanted to speak to a crisis counselor. I nodded, not really hearing them. That was 6 months ago. I still work at the farm. I couldn't leave. It would have felt like running away. But everything is different now. I jump at loud noises. I can't stand having people behind me. And every time I pass the spot where it happened, I see her there on the ground. The nightmares are the worst part. Sometimes I'm the one holding the knife. Sometimes the officer misses, and I feel the blade slice through my throat. But most often, I just see her face in that final moment. Hear her say, "I'm sorry," again and again. The investigators told me later about the robbery. She'd held up a convenience store with that same knife 2 days before entering our program. The clerk had a heart condition and died from a heart attack during the robbery, upgrading the charges to felony murder. She was looking at 25 to life. I understand why the officer took the shot. I understand that Shauna made her choice. I understand that she had to die so I could live. But understanding doesn't make it easier to live with. Every day, I still take care of Duchess. The old mare seems to look for Shauna sometimes, perking up when the barn door opens only to go back to her hay when she sees it's just me. Yesterday I found Shauna's hairband in Duchess's stall. It must have fallen out of her pocket that last day. I sat down in the fresh hay and cried for an hour, this small elastic band clutched in my fist. They tell me the trauma will fade with time, that I'll learn to live with what happened. Maybe they're right. but I don't think I'll ever understand how someone I thought I knew so well could press a knife to my throat, or how quickly a life can end with a single decision, a single bullet. One moment she was a person with hopes and dreams and a future, however troubled. The next, she was gone. And I'm still here, trying to make sense of a day that will never make sense, no matter how many times I replay it in my mind. Story 7. I still have trouble talking about what happened that summer when I was 12. It took me years to even acknowledge it to myself, but writing it down might help me process it. I'm 32 now, but those memories from Portland still feel fresh. My mom and I had moved to Portland in April that year after another one of her boyfriends didn't work out. She always picked these guys who seemed nice at first, but turned out to be jerks. This time it was bad enough that we had to pack up in the middle of the night and drive cross-country to Oregon where my aunt lived. Being the new kid sucked. I was this skinny, quiet kid trying to navigate a new school for the last 2 months before summer break. Nobody really talked to me except Brett, who lived in the apartment below ours. He was a year older and seemed to know everything about everything. The first time we hung out, he showed me how to make fishing rods from sticks, string, and safety pins. It sounds ridiculous now, but back then I thought it was the coolest thing ever. My dad taught me before he left, Brett told me. I didn't tell him my dad had never taught me anything since he disappeared when I was 3. We spent the first few weeks of summer vacation fishing at this little pond in the neighborhood park. We never caught anything bigger than tiny bluegills, but it didn't matter. For those few hours, I didn't have to think about my mom working double shifts or the fact that we were eating mac and cheese for the 3rd time that week. It was just me and Brett, talking about nothing and everything. Then one day in mid-June, Brett came running up to my apartment, practically bouncing with excitement. "I found a better spot. Way bigger fish, man. We gotta go now." The better spot was a large pond about a mile from our apartments, hidden behind some trees on what looked like private property. There was no fence, but something about it made me nervous. "Are we allowed to fish here?" I asked Brett. "Who cares? Nobody's around," he said, already setting up his makeshift rod. We'd been fishing for maybe 20 minutes when I heard someone yelling. A tall guy with a beer gut was marching toward us, his face red with anger. "What the hell do you think you're doing? This is private property. You need permission to fish here." I froze. My stomach dropped like I'd swallowed a boulder. Brett stood up, looking like he might run, but we were both too scared to move. The man kept coming closer, still yelling stuff about trespassing and calling the cops. That's when another voice called out from behind us. "What seems to be the problem here?" The man who approached was probably in his 50s, wearing khaki pants and a light blue cardigan despite the summer heat. He had neatly combed gray hair and these kind eyes behind wire-framed glasses. He looked like someone's grandfather. "These kids are trespassing," Beer Gut said, pointing at us. "You can't just fish wherever you want." The older man smiled. "Actually, this is my property, and I've given these young men permission to fish here." Beer Gut looked confused. "Your property? Since when?" "For quite some time now," the older man said calmly. "So I'd appreciate if you'd stop harassing my guests." After a few more minutes of arguing, Beer Gut finally walked away, still muttering under his breath. Once he was gone, the older man turned to us with a smile. "Don't worry about him. Some people just like being jerks." "Thanks, mister," Brett said. "Is this really your place?" The man chuckled. "No, it's not. Just didn't like seeing him bully you boys." He extended his hand to us. "I'm Mr. Michaels. I live in that blue house over there." He pointed to a small blue house visible through the trees. "I'm Brett, and this is Timothy," Brett said, shaking his hand. "Nice to meet you both. You boys catch anything good?" We showed him our pathetic haul of tiny fish, and he gave us some tips about where the bigger ones might be hiding. Before he left, he told us we were welcome to fish there anytime. "Just try to be respectful and clean up after yourselves, okay?" We nodded eagerly, and he walked away. Brett and I looked at each other and grinned. Having an adult ally made us feel invincible. After that, we went to the pond almost every day. Mr. Michaels would often stop by, sometimes bringing us cold sodas or cookies that his wife had baked. He said she loved to bake, but since their kids were grown and moved away, they didn't have anyone to bake for anymore. Mr. Michaels knew everything about fishing. He showed us how to tie better knots, how to cast properly, even how to identify different species. Sometimes he'd bring his own rod and fish alongside us. He'd tell us stories about when he was our age, about adventures he'd had with his friends, about all the trouble they'd get into. I started looking forward to seeing Mr. Michaels almost as much as I looked forward to fishing. He was patient and kind in a way that none of my mom's boyfriends had ever been. He listened when I talked, asked questions about things I was interested in, and never made me feel stupid. He was what I'd always imagined a dad should be. Around the end of July, Brett told me he had to go stay with his grandparents in Seattle for 2 weeks. I was devastated. Without Brett, I wasn't sure if I should still go to the pond. But the next day, I found myself heading there anyway, fishing rod in hand. Mr. Michaels seemed happy to see me. "Where's your partner in crime today?" he asked. I explained about Brett's trip, and Mr. Michaels nodded. "Well, I'm glad you came anyway, Timothy. It's a perfect day for fishing." That first day alone with Mr. Michaels was great. He seemed to pay more attention to me without Brett there, teaching me more advanced fishing techniques and telling me stories about his time in the Navy. He even brought homemade lemonade and sandwiches for lunch. For a kid who was used to making his own meals while Mom worked, having an adult prepare food for me felt special. The next few days followed a similar pattern. I'd go to the pond, and Mr. Michaels would join me. Sometimes we'd fish in silence. Other times we'd talk about everything from baseball to space. He never talked down to me, always treated what I had to say as important. It felt good. About 4 days after Brett left, Mr. Michaels brought a fancy digital camera to the pond. He asked if he could take some pictures of me with the large bass I'd caught. I felt proud and posed holding my fish. He took several photos, telling me to smile, bigger, to hold the fish higher. "You know, Timothy," he said while reviewing the photos, "you've got a great smile. You should do it more often." I remember blushing, not used to compliments. The next day, Mr. Michaels seemed different, more serious. After we'd been fishing for a while, he sat down next to me on the bank. "Timothy, I've noticed you never talk about your father. Is he not in the picture?" I stared at my fishing line, watching the bobber float on the water's surface. "He left when I was little. I don't remember him." Mr. Michaels nodded thoughtfully. "That must be hard. A boy needs a father figure in his life." He paused. "What about your mother? Does she have a boyfriend?" I told him about our move from Chicago, how my mom was always working, how her last boyfriend had been mean to her. The words just tumbled out. I'd never really talked to anyone about this stuff before. Mr. Michaels put his hand on my shoulder. "That sounds really tough, buddy. You've had to grow up fast, haven't you?" I nodded, feeling a strange lump in my throat. "You know," he continued, "family isn't always about blood. Sometimes the family we choose is more important than the one we're born into." I didn't really understand what he meant then, but I liked the idea of choosing family. The following day, Mr. Michaels brought me a new fishing lure. It was nicer than anything I owned, with shiny metal that caught the sunlight. "I saw this and thought of you," he said. "Consider it an early birthday present." I hadn't told him when my birthday was. "How did you know my birthday's coming up?" I asked. He smiled. "Oh, Brett must have mentioned it." That struck me as odd because I was pretty sure I'd never told Brett my birthday either. But I was so excited about the lure that I pushed the thought aside. As we fished that day, Mr. Michaels started talking more about his family. He told me his wife was actually away visiting their daughter, not at home baking cookies like he'd said before. When I asked why he lied, he just shrugged. "Sometimes adults have complicated reasons for the things they do, Timothy. You'll understand when you're older." Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. The air felt different somehow, heavier. "You know," Mr. Michaels said, sitting closer to me than usual, "I've really enjoyed spending time with you these past few weeks. I feel like we've developed a special bond." I nodded uncomfortably, focusing on my fishing line. "In fact," he continued, "I've been thinking that maybe you and I could have a sort of special relationship, like a chosen family, like I mentioned before." My stomach tightened. I didn't know why, but alarm bells were going off in my head. "People who love each other," Mr. Michaels said, his voice dropping lower, "sometimes touch one another. It's a way of expressing their love and affection." He placed his hand on my knee. "Would it be okay if I touched you, Timothy, as a way of expressing my love?" In that moment, everything became crystal clear. Every instinct in my body screamed danger. Without saying a word, I stood up, grabbed my rod, and ran. I ran all the way home, not looking back once, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. When I got home, my mom was there on her lunch break. One look at my face and she knew something was wrong. It all came pouring out. Meeting Mr. Michaels, the fishing lessons, the camera, and finally, what he'd said today. My mom's face changed as I talked. I'd never seen her look so angry and scared at the same time. She called the police immediately. They came to our apartment and asked me a bunch of questions. They wanted to know exactly what Mr. Michaels had said and done, if he had ever touched me inappropriately before. I told them everything I could remember. The police went to look for Mr. Michaels that same day. Later, a female officer came back to talk to me and my mom. She told us they'd spoken with the man I described, but his name wasn't actually Michaels. She said they were keeping an eye on him, but couldn't arrest him because he hadn't actually done anything illegal yet. They said what he'd done was grooming me, preparing me for abuse. My mom was furious. She screamed at the officers, demanding they do something. They promised they would, but said their hands were tied legally until something more concrete happened. A week later, Brett came back from Seattle. I told him everything. He was shocked and told me he'd always thought Mr. Michaels was kinda weird, but hadn't said anything. We never went back to that pond. About a month later, the female officer visited again. She told us Mr. Michaels, or whatever his name was, had moved away. Far, far away, she emphasized, looking at my mom meaningfully. I didn't understand what that meant until years later. We moved away from Portland that winter. My mom said it was for a better job opportunity, but I knew it was because of what happened. I never fished again after that summer. Sometimes I still think about those weeks at the pond. How easily I was drawn in by kindness and attention. How someone I trusted, someone who seemed so safe, could have such dark intentions. I learned a brutal lesson that summer about how the monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they wear cardigans and bring you cookies and teach you how to fish. Story 8. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened last year at Ravenwood Park. I've gone back and forth about sharing this, but I need to get it off my chest because it's been affecting me more than I want to admit. It was mid-October last year when my boyfriend Jake had a late-night soccer game at Ravenwood. His recreational league sometimes scheduled these annoying night games, and this one started at 8:30. I almost didn't go. It was a Thursday, and I had an early morning the next day. Plus, the weather forecast called for fog and temperatures in the low 40s. But Jake had been having a rough week at work, and I knew he'd appreciate the support. Ravenwood Park is only about a 10-minute drive from my apartment, tucked away at the edge of town where the suburbs start giving way to more rural areas. The park itself is pretty isolated, with dense woods surrounding the sports fields on 3 sides. During the day, it's actually quite beautiful, but at night, it's a completely different story. I arrived just as the game was starting. The parking lot was about half full, which wasn't surprising given the weather and late start time. I grabbed my coffee thermos and hurried toward the field, my breath forming clouds in the cold air. The field lights created this weird effect in the fog, like everything beyond their reach just disappeared into nothingness. Most people were huddled near the bottom of the aluminum bleachers, but I prefer sitting up high so I can see the whole field. Plus, I had brought a thick blanket and didn't want to make awkward small talk with the other girlfriends or wives. I climbed to the top row, settled in, and waved to Jake when he looked over. By the second half, around 9:45, the crowd had thinned considerably. The fog had gotten thicker and the temperature had dropped even more. Only the most dedicated spectators remained, maybe 15 people scattered around the bleachers with no one else near me at the top. That's when I first heard it, a sharp cracking sound from the woods behind me, like someone stepping on a large branch. I didn't think much of it initially, probably just an animal, right? But then I heard it again, followed by what sounded like rustling leaves. I turned around, staring into the darkness beyond the bleachers where the woods began. The field lights created just enough backlight for me to see movement about 30 feet into the tree line. I squinted, trying to make out what was moving around out there. A deer, maybe? It seemed too big for a raccoon or fox. Whatever it was moving deliberately, not randomly foraging. I stood up, partly out of curiosity and partly because my legs were stiff from sitting in the cold. Looking back, I wish I'd just ignored it. I wish I'd just stayed put and focused on the game. I walked down the bleachers and around to the back, where a small clearing separated the seating area from the woods. The sounds had stopped, which only made me more curious. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, pointing it toward the trees. The beam didn't penetrate very far into the dense forest, creating more shadows than illumination. "Hello?" I called out, immediately feeling stupid for doing so. If it was an animal, I'd scare it away. If it was a person, well, announcing my presence probably wasn't the smartest move. I took a few steps closer to the tree line, my shoes crunching on fallen leaves. That's when I saw him. About 20 feet into the woods stood a man. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there completely still, facing my direction. The fog and darkness made it hard to see clearly, but I could tell he was tall and thin. What struck me immediately were his eyes. They looked unnaturally wide, reflecting my flashlight in a way that made them appear to glow slightly. He wasn't dressed for the weather either, just jeans and what looked like a light-colored shirt. My heart started pounding instantly. We just stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds. He didn't say anything. He didn't move. He just watched me. I backed away slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements. When I reached the bleachers again, I turned and quickly climbed back to my seat, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. I looked back toward the woods, but I couldn't see him anymore from my angle. I debated texting Jake, but what would I even say? There's a creepy guy standing in the woods, watching me. He was in the middle of his game, and honestly, I felt silly. Maybe it was just some random hiker who was startled by me approaching, but at 10 at night, in the fog, and those eyes. I tried to focus on the game again, but I kept glancing over my shoulder. I didn't see any more movement, and eventually I started to calm down a bit. By halftime, I had almost convinced myself I'd overreacted. Around 10:15, I needed to use the restroom. The park's only facilities were in a small concrete building near the parking lot, about 100 yards from the soccer field. I really didn't want to go, but I also didn't want to sit there uncomfortable for another 45 minutes. I made my way down the bleachers and followed the gravel path toward the bathroom building, which was dimly lit by a single yellow bulb above the entrance. The fog had gotten even thicker, swirling around the few lampposts in the parking lot. Every few steps, I'd look back toward the field, taking comfort in the bright lights and the sounds of the game. The bathroom was exactly what you'd expect from a park facility: cold concrete, flickering fluorescent light, and that unmistakable public restroom smell. I did my business as quickly as possible, washed my hands, and pushed open the heavy metal door to head back. That's when my blood ran cold. The man from the woods was standing in the parking lot, about 50 feet away from the bathroom building. He was no longer in the tree line, but standing fully in the open, near the edge of the lot where the asphalt met the grass. And he was still staring directly at me with those same wide, unblinking eyes. I froze in the doorway, my hand still on the door handle. From this distance, in the faint glow of the parking lot lights, I could see him more clearly. He looked to be in his 40s maybe, with dark hair and pale skin. His posture was unnervingly stiff, arms hanging straight at his sides. "What do you want?" I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. He didn't respond, didn't move, just kept staring. I pulled out my phone, considering calling Jake or maybe 911, but what crime could I report? A man standing in a public parking lot? Still, I kept my phone in my hand as I stepped away from the bathroom, deciding to head back to the field as quickly as possible. The moment I started moving, he moved too. Not toward me, thankfully, but parallel to my path, maintaining the same distance between us. As I walked the path back toward the field, he walked along the edge of the woods, always keeping pace, always facing me. I quickened my steps, and so did he. When I slowed down, uncertain, he slowed too. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I wanted to run but was afraid that might trigger him to chase me. So I kept walking at a brisk pace, gripping my phone tightly, ready to dial for help. When I reached the field, I glanced back and he was gone. Just vanished. I scanned the edge of the woods but couldn't see him anywhere. The sudden disappearance was almost more unsettling than his presence had been. I practically ran up the bleachers and collapsed into my seat, breathing hard. A couple people glanced my way, but no one said anything. I immediately texted Jake, "There's a weird guy following me. Can we leave right after the game?" He didn't check his phone until the game ended 20 minutes later. By then, I'd been constantly scanning the woods and the surrounding area, but there was no sign of the strange man. I'd almost started to think I was overreacting again when Jake jogged over. "What's going on? Who's following you?" he asked, still breathing hard from the game. I explained what had happened as we gathered our things. Jake, being Jake, wanted to go look for the guy, but I begged him not to. I just wanted to get to the car and go home. The parking lot had emptied out considerably as we walked across it, with only about 10 cars remaining. Jake had his arm around me, and I was feeling slightly safer until we got to our row. And there he was. The man was standing right next to our car, his hand resting on the hood, still with that same intense, wide-eyed stare. In the harsh glare of the parking lot lights, there was something deeply wrong about his face. His expression was completely blank, despite those unnaturally wide eyes, like a doll's face rather than a human's. Jake immediately stepped in front of me. "Hey buddy, what's your problem?" he called out. The man didn't respond. He just stood there, completely motionless except for his eyes, which shifted from me to Jake and back again. "I'm calling the cops," Jake said loudly, pulling out his phone. That's when the man finally moved. He simply turned and walked, not ran, but walked at a deliberate, unhurried pace toward the woods. He never looked back, never changed his expression, just walked straight into the dark tree line and disappeared. We practically jumped into the car. Jake wanted to call the police anyway, but what would we tell them? A strange man was staring at us and then walked away when confronted. They wouldn't take it seriously. The worst part was driving home. The whole time, I kept checking the rearview mirror, convinced we were being followed. Jake drove us a longer route home just to be sure no one was tailing us. When we finally got to my apartment, he insisted on coming in and checking every room, closet, and under the bed before he felt comfortable leaving me alone. I barely slept that night. Every sound made me jump. I kept picturing those wide, unblinking eyes staring at me through my bedroom window. The next day, Jake went back to Ravenwood Park during daylight hours to look around. He found nothing unusual. No one at the park office knew anything about a strange man hanging around. I even called the local police non-emergency line to report a suspicious person, but they just took my information and said they'd keep an eye out during patrols. It's been a year now, and I've never seen that man again. I've avoided Ravenwood Park completely. I won't even go there during the day. Jake's team has played there several times since, but I always make excuses not to attend. The thing that haunts me most is that I don't know what he wanted. Was he planning to attack me if Jake hadn't been there? Was he just trying to scare me? Or was there something else going on, something I can't explain? Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, if the fog and darkness played tricks on my mind. But then I remember those eyes, that blank expression, the deliberate way he followed me, and I know it was real. What terrifies me is that he's still out there somewhere, and I have no idea why he chose me that night. Story 9. I still can't bring myself to go hiking anymore, not after what happened in the Frank Church Wilderness back in 2014. My friend Mark and I used to hit trails all over the West, Washington, Oregon, Montana, you name it. We'd been hiking together since college, probably logged thousands of miles together over the years. The Frank was supposed to be just another adventure. For those who don't know, the Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness is this massive protected area in Idaho, like over 2 million acres massive. It's one of the largest wilderness areas in the lower 48, and parts of it are so remote that you can hike for days without seeing another person. That was the appeal for us. We'd both been dealing with stress at work and wanted to really disconnect. We parked at this trailhead near the middle fork of the Salmon River on a Tuesday morning. Weather was perfect, mid-60s, clear skies, slight breeze. We had enough supplies for a week-long trek, and our plan was to do a loop that would bring us back to the car by the following Monday. The first 2 days went exactly as planned. We followed established trails, made good time, saw some incredible wildlife, even spotted a black bear from a safe distance. On day 3, Thursday, we got this wild idea to go off trail. I remember Mark saying something like, "We've done the tourist version of the Frank enough times. Let's see the real wilderness." In hindsight, that decision changed everything. We cut away from the main trail around 9 in the morning. For the first few hours, it was amazing. The landscape felt untouched. We crossed a couple of small streams, climbed over fallen trees, and navigated by map and compass. I remember feeling so alive, that sense of being the only humans for miles in any direction. It was probably around 2 in the afternoon when the terrain began to change. The forest got denser, darker somehow. The temperature seemed to drop a few degrees, though that might have been my imagination. We came into this clearing that was odd. It was almost perfectly circular, like something had cleared it deliberately. That's when Mark spotted it. At first, I thought it was just some kind of rock formation on the far side of the clearing. But as we got closer, we realized it was man-made. A concrete structure, partially built into the hillside. It was maybe 15 feet across the front, with a steel door that was slightly ajar, not fully open, but not secured either. "What the hell is that doing out here?" I remember asking Mark. We approached cautiously. The closer we got, the more details became apparent. The concrete was old, but not ancient, maybe from the 70s or 80s. And there were these symbols carved or painted all over the exterior walls. Not graffiti exactly, more deliberate. Some looked vaguely like military insignias, others like strange geometric patterns. A few resembled letters from alphabets I didn't recognize. But the weirdest thing, the thing that still haunts me, was the music. From inside the bunker, we could hear heavy metal music playing, not loudly, but clearly audible as we approached. It had this muffled quality like it was coming from deep inside. "Someone's in there," Mark whispered. We stopped about 20 feet away, suddenly very aware of how isolated we were. I felt my heart rate spike. Something about the whole scene felt deeply wrong. This wasn't some park ranger outpost or an old mining structure. This was something else entirely. "We should go," I said. Mark nodded, and without another word, we both turned to leave the clearing. We'd barely made it 10 steps when I heard voices behind us. I turned around and saw 2 men emerging from the tree line to our right, not from the bunker direction. They were dressed in full camouflage with balaclavas covering their faces. The only skin visible was around their eyes, and they were both carrying rifles. "Don't move," one of them shouted. "On your knees now." Everything seemed to slow down. I remember noticing details with bizarre clarity. How one man was significantly taller than the other, how their camo patterns didn't match, how the shorter one had a slight limp as he approached. "I said on your knees," the taller one repeated, raising his rifle to his shoulder. In that moment, some primal instinct took over. Without any verbal communication, I dropped my backpack and ran, just bolted into the trees away from both the men and the bunker. I heard Mark's footsteps right behind me, and then a shout, "Stop! We need them alive!" That phrase, "we need them alive," sent ice through my veins in a way I can't describe. Then came the gunshots. The first few went high. I could hear them cracking through branches above us. They were warning shots. But then I heard a different sound, bullets thumping into tree trunks near us. They were aiming for our legs. We ran like I've never run before. No trail, no path, just pure adrenaline-fueled flight. Branches whipped our faces. We stumbled over rocks and roots, but we didn't stop. Couldn't stop. I could hear the men crashing through the forest. behind us, shouting to each other. I don't know how long we ran, maybe 30 minutes at full sprint, before the sounds of pursuit began to fade. But we kept going, pushing deeper into the wilderness, changing direction constantly in hopes of throwing them off our trail. It wasn't until the sun started to set that we finally stopped, collapsing behind a fallen tree. We were both bloody from scratches, soaked in sweat, and completely terrified. And we quickly realized the magnitude of our situation. We'd left our backpacks behind. No food, no water, no shelter, no map. Nothing but the clothes we were wearing and the few items in our pockets. I had a small pocket knife, a lighter, and a half-empty water bottle. Mark had his phone, useless with no signal, a compass, and a granola bar. That was it. "What the hell was that?" Mark finally whispered. "Who were those guys?" I shook my head. "I don't know, but we need to get back to civilization." The next 3 days were the most grueling of my life. We moved during daylight, trying to find our way back to any trail or road. We rationed Mark's granola bar for the first day. After that, we survived on berries we could identify as safe, roots, and water from streams. We were constantly hungry, increasingly weak, and always afraid. Each night, we'd find some kind of natural shelter, a hollow beneath tree roots, a small cave, anywhere we could hide, and take turns keeping watch. Sleep was almost impossible. Every snapping twig, every rustle in the underbrush sent my heart racing. I kept imagining those men finding us, dragging us back to that bunker. For what purpose? I didn't want to know. By the 3rd day, we were in bad shape. Mark had twisted his ankle crossing a stream, and I was battling what felt like the beginning of hypothermia from sleeping in wet clothes. Our sense of direction was completely shot. We tried following the sun, tried using the compass, but without landmarks we recognized or a proper map, we were essentially wandering. It was pure luck that we stumbled onto a dirt logging road late that afternoon. We followed it for hours, jumping into the trees at any sound of vehicles. Finally, around dusk, we came upon a ranger station. I remember the look on the ranger's face when he opened the door. 2 half-starved, filthy men with wild eyes and torn clothing. We told him everything while he gave us water and called for medical assistance. Then came the police, the statements, the search parties. They went back to the area we described but found nothing. No bunker, no armed men, no sign of our abandoned backpacks, just wilderness. One officer, an older guy who'd worked in the area for decades, pulled us aside after the official interview. "The Frank has a history," he said quietly. "There are groups that come out here to avoid attention, militia types, survivalists, people who want to disappear. We usually leave each other alone, but sometimes..." He trailed off, shrugging. Mark and I lost touch after that. The experience changed something between us. He moved to Chicago the following year, about as far from wilderness as you can get. I still live in Idaho, but I stick to cities and suburbs now. Sometimes I'll drive past a trailhead and feel a pull, that old love of the wild places. But then I remember the music coming from that bunker door, those cymbals on the concrete, the voice shouting, "We need them alive," and I keep driving. I've told this story to a few people over the years. Most think we stumbled upon some kind of drug operation. Others suggest it was just some private property owner who got spooked by trespassers. But neither explanation accounts for what they said, or the bizarre symbols, or why armed men would hunt us for miles through the wilderness. The human mind wants explanations, closure. I've accepted I'll never have either. All I know is that somewhere deep in the Frank Church wilderness, there's a concrete bunker with a steel door. And I pray no one else ever finds it. Story 10. I still get chills thinking about what happened to me last month. I've barely told anyone about it, but I need to get it out of my system, and maybe writing it all down will help me make sense of it. I live alone in a 2-story house about 15 minutes outside of Pinecrest City. It's quiet out here, peaceful, or at least it was until that night. I've always felt safe in my home. It's far enough from neighbors that I have privacy, but close enough that I never felt isolated. That changed on Thursday, March 10th. I'd had an absolutely brutal day at work. We were short-staffed, and I ended up staying late to finish a project that couldn't wait. By the time I pulled into my driveway, it was already past 10 at night. All I wanted was to shower and fall into bed. The house was dark when I got home, which wasn't unusual. I never leave lights on when I'm out. I unlocked the front door, flipped on the lights, dumped my purse and laptop bag on the kitchen counter, and headed straight upstairs. I was so tired I didn't even bother making dinner. Just grabbed a granola bar from my bag and ate it while walking up the stairs. I went through my usual bedtime routine on autopilot. I turned on my bedroom light, set out my clothes for the next day, and went to the bathroom across the hall to wash my face and brush my teeth. The bathroom door was open, and I could see my bedroom from where I stood at the sink. That's when I heard it, the distinct sound of a door closing downstairs. My whole body went cold. I froze with my toothbrush halfway to my mouth, listening intently. Had I imagined it? Maybe it was just the house settling? I stood there for what felt like forever, straining to hear any other sounds. Nothing, just silence. I tried to rationalize it. Old houses make weird noises all the time, right? But this wasn't a creak or a groan. It was definitely a door, closing. I spit out my toothpaste and wiped my mouth, trying to calm my racing heart. "Get a grip, Olivia," I whispered to myself. "You need to check." I crept out of the bathroom and stood at the top of the stairs, listening again. Still nothing. Part of me wanted to just lock myself in my bedroom and ignore it, but I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep unless I checked. So I made my way downstairs, moving as quietly as possible. I flipped on every light switch I passed. The living room was empty, the dining room too. Nothing seemed disturbed. The kitchen looked exactly as I'd left it, my bag still on the counter. I was starting to feel silly for being so scared when I noticed the window in the kitchen was partially open. Not wide, just a few inches, enough to let in a slight breeze. Relief washed over me. Of course, the wind had probably blown one of the interior doors shut. It had happened before when I'd accidentally left windows open. I closed and locked the window, feeling much calmer. I double-checked the front and back doors, both locked, and headed back upstairs, turning off lights as I went. By the time I crawled into bed, I was laughing at myself for being so jumpy. I set my phone on the nightstand, turned off my bedside lamp, and settled into the darkness. I was so exhausted that I started drifting off almost immediately. I don't know how long I'd been dozing when something pulled me back to consciousness. A sound, something downstairs. At first, I thought I was dreaming. I kept my eyes closed, trying to sink back into sleep. But then I heard it again, unmistakable this time. The sound of movement, someone walking around downstairs. My eyes flew open, and I lay perfectly still, listening. I told myself I was being paranoid again, that it was just my imagination working overtime because of what had happened earlier. Maybe it was the house settling, or the wind outside, or footsteps, definitely footsteps, moving from what sounded like the living room toward the kitchen. My heart started hammering so hard I was afraid whoever was down there would hear it. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but the sounds continued. A soft thud, the creak of a floorboard, the subtle but distinct sound of someone trying to move quietly. I strained my ears, hoping desperately that I was wrong, that there was some innocent explanation, but the sounds grew louder, more definite, and then, oh God, I heard the first step on the staircase creak. Someone was coming upstairs. Pure panic shot through me. This wasn't my imagination. This wasn't the wind or the house settling. There was someone in my house, and they were coming up the stairs toward my bedroom. I flung myself out of bed, nearly falling in my haste. My legs were shaking so badly I could barely stand. I ran to my bedroom door, which I'd left open a crack, and pushed it shut as quietly as I could, turning the lock with trembling fingers. The footsteps continued, slow and deliberate. Whoever it was, they weren't rushing. They were taking their time, moving carefully up each step. That somehow made it even more terrifying. I backed away from the door, stumbling in the darkness until I bumped into my nightstand. I grabbed my phone and retreated to the far corner of my room, sliding down the wall until I was crouched on the floor. My fingers fumbled with the phone, missing the passcode twice before finally getting it right. I tapped on the phone app and dialed 911. My hand shaking so badly, I almost dropped the phone. The footsteps had reached the top of the stairs now. I could hear them moving down the hallway toward my room. The 911 operator answered. 911, what's your emergency? I couldn't speak. I was too terrified to make a sound. What if they heard me? What if they knew exactly where I was hiding? The footsteps stopped right outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, pressing the phone against my ear but unable to say a word. The operator kept asking if anyone was there. I wanted to scream for help, but fear had paralyzed my vocal cords. And then I saw it. The doorknob turning slowly, twisting back and forth. I bit down on my knuckles to keep from making a sound. The door rattled slightly as whoever was on the other side tried to open it. Thank God I'd locked it. Thank God. The doorknob kept turning, more insistently now. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the sound had been. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen in terror, before I realized the footsteps were moving away. They were heading back down the hallway, toward the stairs. Only when I could hear them descending the staircase did I finally find my voice. Help, I whispered into the phone, so quietly I wasn't sure the operator would hear me. Someone's in my house, please help me. The operator responded immediately, asking for my address. I gave it to her in a trembling whisper, telling her I was alone and locked in my bedroom with an intruder in the house. Stay on the line, she told me. Officers are on their way. They'll be there in minutes. Stay quiet and keep your door locked. Those minutes were the longest of my life. I stayed huddled in the corner, clutching my phone, straining to hear any sound from downstairs. There were occasional noises, a thump, the creak of a floorboard, but nothing definite enough to tell me where the intruder was or what they were doing. The operator kept talking to me in a calm, reassuring voice, but I barely registered her words. All I could think was, what if they come back? What if they break down the door? What if the police don't get here in time? When I finally heard sirens in the distance, tears of relief sprang to my eyes. The operator told me to stay put until the officers cleared the house. I heard them arrive, car doors slamming, radios crackling, voices calling out. Eventually, there was a knock on my bedroom door, and a woman's voice identified herself as Officer Martinez. I unlocked the door with shaking hands to find two police officers standing there. The relief I felt seeing them nearly made my knees buckle. They helped me downstairs while other officers searched the house. But they found nothing. No intruder. No signs of forced entry. Nothing stolen or disturbed. Except, and this is what still gives me nightmares, the front door was unlocked. I am 100% certain I had locked it after coming home. I always do. It's automatic for me. But somehow it was unlocked when the police checked it. The officers suggested the intruder must have fled when they heard the sirens, but I'm not so sure. If they left through the front door, wouldn't the officers have seen them? They arrived so quickly after my call. One of the officers noticed the kitchen window I'd closed earlier and asked if it could have been the point of entry. I explained finding it open earlier and how I'd thought the wind had caused the door I heard to close. That's when a horrible thought occurred to me. What if they were already in the house when I got home? What if they'd been hiding somewhere, in a closet or the basement, waiting for me to fall asleep? The police took my statement and promised to patrol the area regularly for the next few nights. They checked all the locks and windows before they left, assuring me everything was secure. One of them suggested I get a security system installed as soon as possible. I didn't sleep in my house that night. I packed a bag and went to a hotel. The next day, I had the locks changed and a security system installed with cameras covering every entry point. I still live in my house, but I don't feel safe here anymore. I check closets and underbeds before I can relax. I triple-check the locks on doors and windows. I keep my phone within reach at all times. The police never found any evidence of who was in my house that night. They suggested it might have been a drifter looking for a place to sleep, or maybe teens pulling a prank. But I don't believe that. The way they moved so deliberately through my house, the way they came straight to my bedroom door, it felt targeted, intentional. Sometimes I wonder if they're still out there, watching my house, waiting for another opportunity. I wonder if they'll come back. And sometimes, in the darkest hours of the night, I wonder if they ever really left at all. Story 11. I never thought I'd be sharing this, but I can't keep it bottled up anymore. It's been almost 6 years since it happened, and I still wake up in cold sweats some nights. I'm hoping that writing this down might help me process it, and maybe someone out there will understand or have experienced something similar. I was 25 when everything happened, living in a small 2-bedroom apartment in Pasadena. The rent was too high for just me, so I'd been looking for a roommate when I met Lyra. She was a year older than me, with this effortless confidence that made our tiny apartment feel like an actual home instead of just a place to crash. We clicked right away. For 2 years, we lived together without any major issues. We'd split chores, occasionally share meals, and respect each other's space. Lyra was an artist with this amazing talent for drawing birds and these intricate, spiraling patterns in her sketchbooks. She decorated our living room with her artwork and these little potted plants that she nurtured like they were her children. I still remember how she'd talk to them while watering them every Sunday morning. Lyra had this spiritual side to her that I never quite understood, but always respected. She meditated daily, burned sage occasionally, which I honestly found kind of soothing, and was always reading books about finding inner peace and connecting with nature. She was a vegetarian too, really committed to it. Would get these fancy mushroom burgers and make her own. Almond milk. Everything changed in April of 2017. Lyra came home one evening, practically bouncing with excitement. She'd booked a 2-week trip to Bolivia for an ayahuasca retreat. I had no clue what ayahuasca was, so after she went to bed, I Googled it. From what I understood, it was this hallucinogenic tea used in spiritual ceremonies in South America. People would drink it under the guidance of a shaman and have these intense visions that were supposedly enlightening. Not my scene at all, but it seemed right up Lyra's alley. The day before she left, we had dinner together. She was so excited, telling me about the small village where the retreat was located and how she'd been in contact with the shaman for months. I remember hugging her goodbye the next morning, telling her to take loads of pictures. I even joked that she shouldn't come back with any exotic parasites. God, I wish parasites were what she brought back. When she returned 2 weeks later, I almost didn't recognize her. I was expecting her to come back all sun-kissed and glowing, full of stories. Instead, she looked sick. Her normally shiny brown hair was tangled and clearly unwashed. Her skin had this grayish, waxy look to it, and there were dark circles under her eyes that made her look like she hadn't slept in days. But the physical changes weren't what scared me the most. It was the way she acted. Lyra had always been social, always ready with a smile or a story, but this person who came back barely acknowledged me. When I asked about her trip, she just stared at me for a few seconds too long and then mumbled something about it being transformative before locking herself in her room. Over the next few days, I kept trying to reach out to her, thinking maybe she was just jet-lagged or processing some intense experience, but she just got more distant. She stopped drawing. Her plants, which she'd always cared for so meticulously, started dying because she wasn't watering them. She'd spend hours just sitting on our balcony, staring at nothing. Then came the food thing. Lyra had been vegetarian for as long as I'd known her. So when I opened the fridge one morning and found a package of raw ground beef, I was confused. I thought maybe she'd bought it for me, though we usually didn't shop for each other. I mentioned it casually later that day, and she just shrugged and said, I needed it. That night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to get some water. As I passed through our kitchen, I saw Lyra sitting on the floor by the window. The moonlight was streaming in, illuminating her face, which was smeared with something dark. In her hands was the package of ground beef, and she was eating it, raw, with her fingers, just scooping it into her mouth while staring at the moon. I froze, not knowing what to say. She turned to look at me, and I swear her eyes reflected the moonlight like an animal's. She didn't say anything, just kept eating. I backed away and locked myself in my room for the rest of the night. The next morning, I convinced myself I'd dreamed it. But when I checked the fridge, the beef was gone, and there was a smear of something reddish-brown on the kitchen floor that I had to clean up. I tried to talk to her about it, asked if everything was okay, if something had happened at the retreat. She just looked through me like I wasn't even there and said, I'm figuring out who I really am. Then came the insects. I first noticed them when I saw a small plastic container on our counter with air holes poked in the lid. Inside were live crickets, the kind you'd buy to feed a pet reptile. We didn't have any pets. A day later, I found the container empty. When I asked Lyra about it, she said, they're inside me now, with this creepy little smile that made my skin crawl. I started spending more time away from the apartment. I'd make excuses to work late or visit friends, but I couldn't avoid coming home entirely. And every time I did, things were worse. The apartment started to smell. Not just normal bad odors, but this thick, earthy smell of rot coming from her room. Lyra herself looked worse every day. Her hair greasy and matted, her clothes hanging off her like she was losing weight rapidly. I'd hear her talking to herself at night, but couldn't make out the words. The space that had once felt like home now felt oppressive, like it belonged to her, and I was the intruder. I started locking my bedroom door at night after I woke up once to find her standing in my doorway, just watching me sleep. When I asked what she was doing, she said she was making sure it was still me in there. One morning, I came out of my room to find all the mirrors in the apartment covered with sheets. When I pulled one down in the bathroom, I saw that the glass was cracked, with what looked like dried blood on it. There were deep scratch marks on the bathroom door too, like someone had been clawing at it from the inside. I found her sketchbooks in the trash. The beautiful birds and spirals were now covered with violent charcoal scribbles. On some pages, there were just these bizarre symbols that looked like nothing I'd ever seen before, drawn so hard the paper had torn in places. I knew I needed to do something. I considered calling her parents, but she'd never talked much about her family. I thought about calling a mental health crisis line, but I was afraid they'd just dismiss it as roommate drama. I even Googled exorcists in Pasadena one night when I heard her chanting something in a language that definitely wasn't English or Spanish. But before I could take action, everything came to a head. I came home from work on a Tuesday evening in early May. The apartment was unusually quiet. No weird chanting, no pacing footsteps. For a second, I felt relieved, thinking maybe she'd gone out for once. Then I saw her sitting cross-legged in the middle of our living room. She was naked from the waist up, and there was blood, so much blood, pooled in her lap and dripping down her thighs onto our beige carpet. At first, I thought she'd hurt herself, maybe slit her wrists. But as I got closer, I realized what I was seeing. She had a piece of skin in her hands. Her skin. She'd peeled it off her own face, like she was removing a mask. One side of her face was still intact, but the other was raw, exposed muscle and tissue, blood streaming down, and she was smiling at me with what was left of her lips. "I need to see who's underneath," she said, her voice garbled by the blood in her mouth. "Don't you want to know who's really in there, Stephanie?" I ran to my room, locked the door, and called 911. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial. I told the operator my roommate was hurting herself, that there was blood everywhere, that I was scared she might try to hurt me too. While I waited for help to arrive, I could hear her moving around outside my door, not knocking or trying to get in, just pacing, and speaking in that strange language again. When the police arrived, I heard them trying to talk to her, then shouting, then gunshots, 2 of them. When I finally came out of my room, they were zipping her body into a bag, but before they closed it, I saw her face. One eye was still open, cloudy and lifeless, but somehow still staring at me. And in that moment, I knew whatever had come back from Bolivia wasn't Lyra anymore. I couldn't stay in that apartment. That night, I packed an overnight bag and stayed with my friend Mia. The next day, I called the landlord and broke my lease, paying the penalty without complaint. I needed out. Within a week, I'd moved all my stuff into storage and found a temporary place to stay. The police report said Lyra had experienced a psychotic break, possibly triggered by the ayahuasca. They found more of those weird symbols drawn all over her bedroom walls, along with dead beetles and other insects scattered across her floor. Her laptop had hundreds of photos of the moon taken from our apartment window, all slightly out of focus, but I don't think it was just a bad trip. I think she encountered something during that ceremony in Bolivia, something that followed her home, something that slowly took over until there was nothing left of the Lyra I knew. It's been almost 6 years now. I've moved 3 times since then. I still keep my lights on at night. I still lock my bedroom door, even though I live alone. And every morning I check the mirror just to make sure it's still me looking back. Sometimes, when the moon is full, I wake up in the middle of the night and feel this urge to go look at it. But I never do. I keep my curtains closed and wait for the feeling to pass. Because whatever Lyra brought back, I'm terrified it's still out there, looking for a new home. Story 12. I still can't believe it's been 3 years since that Halloween night in Oak Ridge. I've tried to forget about it, tried to convince myself that it was just another stupid Halloween prank gone wrong. But I can't get the image of that man out of my head. His weird, lopsided walk, the knife, the way he looked at us. I was 17 then. My friend Mark had just gotten his license a few months earlier and was eager to show off his dad's Subaru Outback that he was allowed to borrow for special occasions. Halloween definitely counted as special. There were 6 of us that night: me, Mark, Jess, Tyler, Aiden, and Mia. We'd all been friends since middle school, and Halloween was our thing. Every year we'd do something together, usually just watching horror movies at someone's house or going trick-or-treating when we were younger. But that year was different. Mark suggested we explore this abandoned house at the edge of town. Everyone in Oak Ridge knew about it. This old Victorian place about 2 miles past the last neighborhood on Willowbrook Road. It had been empty for years, probably close to a decade. The story was that some old guy died there and his family couldn't sell it because of the bad housing market back then. I remember feeling uneasy about the idea, but everyone else was so pumped about it. Tyler kept saying how cool it would be to have a real-life scary experience on Halloween. Mia brought her fancy camera to take pictures. Jess packed a backpack with flashlights, snacks, and beer that her older brother had bought for us. We left around 9 that night. Mark picked us all up, and we blasted Monster Mash and other Halloween songs the whole drive over. It was a clear night, cold enough to see our breath, with a full moon that kept disappearing behind clouds. Perfect Halloween weather. The house was set back from the road quite a bit, with a long driveway leading up to it. Mark parked at the entrance to the driveway, partly hidden by some trees, in case anyone drove by. We didn't want to get caught trespassing. I remember feeling this weird tension in my stomach as we walked up that driveway, our flashlights bobbing in the dark. The house looked exactly like you'd expect a haunted house to look. Peeling paint, broken windows, overgrown yard. It was like something from a movie, which I think is why everyone was so excited rather than scared. But then we got closer, and I saw something that made my skin crawl. There was a pumpkin on the front porch, a freshly carved pumpkin with a candle inside, still burning. "Guys," I said, stopping in my tracks, "look at that pumpkin. Someone's been here." Aiden just laughed. Probably some kids who had the same idea as us. Or maybe someone put it there to freak people out. "But the candle's still lit," I pointed out. "That means someone was here recently, like very recently." "Or someone lives here," Mia said. But she was smiling as she said it, clearly not taking it seriously. Tyler punched my shoulder. "Dude, it's Halloween. People do weird shit on Halloween. Stop being so paranoid." I didn't want to seem like a chicken, so I dropped it. But that pumpkin bothered me. It was too deliberate, too fresh. We went up to the porch and Jess tried the front door. It was locked, but one of the windows nearby was broken enough that we could pry it open more and climb through. I went in last, still feeling hesitant. The inside of the house was a mess. Not just abandoned house messy, but like someone had ransacked it. Furniture was overturned, there were weird stains on the walls, and it smelled like a mixture of mold and something else I couldn't identify. Something metallic and unpleasant. We split up into smaller groups to explore. I stayed with Mark while the others went upstairs or into other rooms on the ground floor. Mark and I headed toward what looked like a kitchen in the back of the house. The kitchen was in even worse shape than the front rooms. Cabinets hanging open, broken dishes everywhere, and a massive old refrigerator that stood open, reeking of decades-old rot. "This place is gross," Mark said, shining his flashlight around, "but honestly not as scary as I thought it would be." I was about to agree when I heard something, a shuffling sound from outside the kitchen window. I froze, listening hard. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. Mark shook his head, but he stopped moving too. We both stood perfectly still, our flashlights pointed at the window. The window was filthy, covered in grime and cobwebs, but I could still see through parts of it. And that's when I saw him. There was a man standing in the side yard, just looking at the house. He was tall and thin, wearing dark clothes that looked dirty and torn. But what caught my attention, what still haunts me, was the knife in his hand. It wasn't a small pocket knife or even a kitchen knife. It was huge, more like a machete, and he was gripping it tightly. I grabbed Mark's arm and pointed. He saw the man too and whispered, "Holy shit." The man must have heard us or sensed us watching because he suddenly turned toward our window. His face, I'll never forget his face. It was gaunt, with deep-set eyes that reflected the moonlight. He had this weird, intense expression, like he'd found something he'd been looking for. Then he started moving toward the house, toward us. But his walk was all wrong. He sort of lurched forward, dragging one leg behind him as if it was injured or maybe not even all there. It was this weird hobbling gait that somehow made him even more terrifying. "We need to go," I choked out. "Now." We backed away from the window and ran back to the front of the house, calling for our friends. "We need to leave. There's someone outside with a knife," I heard Jess yell from upstairs. "Very funny, guys." "We're not joking," Mark shouted back. "There's a man outside with a fucking machete." Maybe it was the panic in Mark's voice, but the others started coming downstairs quickly. Tyler and Aiden were laughing, thinking we were trying to scare them, but Mia and Jess looked concerned. "Seriously, we saw him," I insisted. "He was in the side yard, and he's coming toward the house. He had this massive knife, and he walks weird, like his leg is messed up or something." As if to confirm what I was saying, we heard a loud bang from the back of the house, like someone had hit something or maybe forced a door open. Aiden's smile dropped. "Shit, is this for real?" Before anyone could answer, we heard heavy footsteps, that uneven gait, thud drag, coming closer. "Go," Mark hissed, pushing us toward the front door. We ran to the door, but in our panic we couldn't get it open. It was stuck or locked from the inside somehow. The footsteps were getting closer. "The window!" Jess pointed to the window we'd climbed through earlier. Mia went first, then Jess. Tyler helped them and then scrambled through himself. Aiden was next, with Mark behind him. I was last, looking back down the hallway as I climbed onto the windowsill. That's when I saw him at the end of the hall, the hobbling man. He was even more terrifying up close. His clothes weren't just dirty. They were covered in dark stains that looked sickeningly like dried blood. The knife in his hand gleamed in the beam of my flashlight. And his face. There was something so wrong about his face. It wasn't just gaunt. It was distorted somehow, like parts of it had been damaged. He saw me and made this sound. Not quite a growl, not quite a laugh, but something in between. Then he started moving toward me faster, that knife raised. I practically threw myself out the window, cutting my arm on a piece of broken glass but barely feeling it. Mark was waiting to help me up, and then we were all running down the driveway toward the car. I heard the window break more behind us, heard that thud drag sound as the man came after us. I didn't look back. I just ran. We reached the car, and Mark fumbled with the keys, dropping them once before managing to unlock it. We all piled in, screaming at Mark to hurry. I was in the back seat with Jess and Mia, both of them crying now. Tyler was in the passenger seat, and Aiden was crammed in with us in the back. Mark finally got the car started, and we peeled out onto the road. I looked back then and saw the hobbling man standing at the end of the driveway, watching us go. He didn't chase after the car. He just stood there, that big knife hanging at his side, watching until we turned a corner and couldn't see him anymore. We drove straight to the police station. We were all talking over each other, trying to explain what had happened. The officers took our statements, but I could tell they were skeptical. They thought we were just kids who'd scared ourselves on Halloween, or maybe encountered a homeless person who was living in the abandoned house. But they agreed to send a patrol car out to check the place. We waited at the station, all of us still shaking, until the officers returned about an hour later. They said they'd searched the house thoroughly and found no one. No signs of recent occupation except for that pumpkin on the porch, which they agreed was strange. They suggested it might have been placed there by other teenagers earlier in the day. As we were leaving the station, still unsatisfied with their explanation, Tyler and Aiden pulled me aside. They looked guilty. "Look," Tyler said, "we need to tell you something. We kind of arranged for someone to scare us at the house tonight." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "What? Who?" "This guy from the senior class, Chris Miller," Aiden explained. "We paid him $20 to show up and freak everyone out, but it wasn't supposed to be that intense." Tyler pulled out his phone. "He's been texting me. Look." I looked at his phone and felt the blood drain from my face. There were multiple messages from Chris. "Dude, I'm not coming. This place is creepy AF. Seriously, there's someone already here, some weird guy. He saw me and started coming after me. I got the fuck out of there. Do not go to that house. I'm not kidding." The messages were time-stamped before we'd even arrived at the house. We showed the texts to the police, who reluctantly agreed to check out the property again the next day in daylight. They even interviewed Chris, who confirmed he'd gone to the house earlier but left after seeing a strange man with a knife. But they never found anyone. The house was empty. They found no evidence of blood or violence, just that pumpkin, which seemed to have been placed there recently, but gave no clues as to who had put it there. I've thought about that night countless times since then. I've tried to rationalize it, to explain it away. Maybe it was just a homeless person with mental health issues. Maybe it was someone playing a Halloween prank that went too far. But I can't shake the memory of that man's face or the way he moved, that unnatural, hobbling gait. And sometimes, when I'm about to fall asleep, I hear it again. Thud drag, coming closer. I drove past that house last month. It's been renovated now, turned into a cute family home with a white picket fence. I wonder if the new owners know what happened there. I wonder if they've seen him. To this day, none of us know who that man was, or what would have happened if we hadn't gotten out when we did. The police never found any leads. It's like he appeared out of nowhere on Halloween night and then vanished just as mysteriously. Sometimes I think about going back, trying to find answers. But then I remember that sound, thud drag, and the way he looked at me through that window. and I know I never want to see that house again. Story 13. I've debated for weeks whether to share my story here. Part of me is afraid to put this into words. Another part of me needs to get it out. Maybe someone can learn from my experience. Maybe someone in a similar situation will see the warning signs I missed. I'm a 24-year-old marketing professional living in Phoenix. I moved here after college, excited about the job opportunity and the chance to start fresh in a new city. Being single in a new place is tough, though. After a few months of focusing on establishing myself at work, I decided to try the dating app scene. It was early September of last year when I matched with Ryan. His profile showed a guy with a great smile, outdoorsy photos, and a bio that mentioned his love of local breweries and rescue dogs. We messaged for about a week before meeting up at a coffee shop downtown. I remember being genuinely relieved when he looked like his photos. Even better in person, actually. That first date lasted 4 hours. We talked about everything. Our jobs. He worked in software sales. Our families. He was close with his sister. Our shared love of hiking. He asked thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely interested in my answers. When I mentioned I was still exploring Phoenix, he suggested several local spots I should check out. By the end of the date, I felt that flutter of excitement you get when you meet someone with real potential. Our relationship progressed naturally from there. He took me to this amazing hidden restaurant for our second date, remembering I'd mentioned loving Thai food. On our third date, we hiked Camelback Mountain at sunrise. It was breathtaking. By our fifth date, we were official. Everything felt easy and right. For the first 6 months, I honestly thought I'd hit the jackpot. Ryan was attentive without being clingy. He'd surprise me with little things. My favorite coffee, when he knew I had a stressful presentation. A book by an author I'd mentioned liking. He got along with my friends, remembered details about my family, and always made sure I got home safely after nights out. The sex was amazing, and for the first time in my dating life, I felt respected and valued. Looking back, I should have noticed the shift sooner. It started with small things around the 6-month mark. Ryan began texting more frequently during the workday, asking what I was doing or who I was with. If I didn't respond quickly, he'd send follow-ups. Everything okay? Did I say something wrong? At the time, I interpreted it as him being concerned or affectionate. Then came the coincidences. I'd mentioned going out for happy hour with coworkers, and Ryan would suddenly appear at the same bar. I was just in the neighborhood and thought I'd surprise you. The first time, I was charmed. By the third time, I felt uneasy, but pushed those feelings aside. 7 months in, his questions became more pointed. Who's this Jake that keeps liking your Instagram posts? Why are you staying so late at work lately? That outfit's a bit revealing for a work function, don't you think? Each question came with a smile or was wrapped in a joke, making it hard to call out without seeming oversensitive. The first truly frightening incident happened 8 months into our relationship. I was having lunch with a male colleague to discuss a project. Ryan texted asking what I was doing. I replied honestly. 20 minutes later, I looked up to see Ryan walking into the restaurant, his eyes immediately finding our table. He pulled up a chair, introduced himself to my coworker with a firm handshake and a tight smile, and didn't leave for the remainder of lunch. In the car afterward, he casually asked if I was attracted to my coworker. When I got annoyed and tried to explain it was a work lunch, he dropped it with an "I'm just asking" and changed the subject. That weekend, we had our first serious fight. Ryan had gone through my phone while I was showering and found texts between me and my friend Sarah where I'd mentioned being frustrated with him for showing up at my lunch. When confronted, he exploded, saying I was talking behind his back and embarrassing him to my friends. When I tried to walk away to cool down, he grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave marks and said, "You don't get to walk away from me when I'm talking to you." The look in his eyes in that moment, I'll never forget it. It wasn't anger, it was something colder, control. He apologized profusely the next morning, showed up at my door with flowers and tears in his eyes, saying he'd never forgive himself, that he'd been under stress at work, that it would never happen again. The classic script. And despite everything I know about abusive relationships, despite having advised friends to leave partners for less, I accepted his apology. I told myself it was a one-time thing, that everyone makes mistakes. The peace lasted exactly 2 weeks. Then Ryan accused me of flirting with a bartender when I smiled while ordering a drink. That night, he accidentally broke a framed photo of me with my college friends, including several guys. The next week he called 17 times when I was at a work dinner that ran late. 9 months in, after yet another fight about my lack of communication, I'd taken 2 hours to respond to a text while in meetings. I finally saw our relationship clearly. I ended things the next day in public at a cafe near my office. I was specific about why: his controlling behavior, his jealousy, his monitoring of my whereabouts. He seemed stunned, then quietly angry. "You're making a mistake," he said as I left. "You won't find anyone who cares about you like I do." I thought that would be the end. I was so wrong. The texts started that night, dozens of them, ranging from "please give me another chance" to "you'll regret this" to "I can't live without you." When I blocked his number, he started contacting me from new ones. Then came the emails, the social media messages, the comments on old Instagram posts. 3 days after our breakup, I found flowers on my car at work. No card, but I knew they were from him. A week later, a note under my windshield wiper: "I miss watching you sleep." That one sent me straight to the building security with a photo of Ryan, asking them not to allow him on the premises. I started noticing his car parked on my street. I'd see him at the grocery store near my apartment, at the gym, at the coffee shop where I work remotely on Fridays. Always at a distance, always with that same cold smile when our eyes met, always leaving without approaching me. 2 weeks in, I went to the police. They were sympathetic, but unhelpful. "Has he threatened you directly?" "No." "Has he attempted to enter your home?" "No." "Has he physically harmed you since the breakup?" "No." They told me to document everything, but without proof of imminent danger, there wasn't much they could do. One officer suggested I change my routine, as if becoming a prisoner in my own life was the solution. I did what I could. I changed my routes to work. I varied the times I left home. I asked friends to check in on me and stopped going places alone. I installed a security system in my apartment. I even started seeing a therapist to help cope with the constant anxiety. A month after our breakup, the harassment seemed to ease. For 3 days, no texts from unknown numbers, no sightings. I started to hope maybe he'd moved on. Then my phone rang from a blocked number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Morgan." His voice was calm, conversational. "You know, I've been thinking. You took something precious from me. I think it's only fair that I take something from you." The line went dead. I tried calling back, but it just rang and rang. My mom lives alone about 20 minutes from me. We talk almost daily, and Ryan knew all about her her schedule, her address, even the code to her garage because I'd mentioned it once when I was dropping off groceries for her. Ryan and my mom had only met twice, but she'd found him charming. I'd been too embarrassed to tell her the full extent of our breakup. I called her immediately. No answer. I called again, straight to voicemail. I grabbed my keys and raced to her house, running every yellow light, my heart pounding so hard I felt sick. When I pulled up to her house, her car was in the driveway. So was a car I didn't recognize. I ran to the front door, fumbling with my keys, when the door opened. My mom stood there smiling. "Morgan, what a surprise." Behind her stood Ryan, holding a cup of tea, looking for all the world like a welcome guest. "Ryan stopped by to bring me those heirloom tomato plants we talked about," my mom explained. "We've been having the nicest chat about gardening." The look Ryan gave me over my mother's shoulder. I can't describe the malice wrapped in that smile. He knew exactly what he was doing. He'd managed to make me panic, to show me he could get to the people I love anytime he wanted. "I was just leaving," he said pleasantly, setting down his cup. He hugged my mom goodbye and walked past me to his car. As he passed, he whispered, "She's lovely. It would be a shame if something happened to her." Then he winked. I spent the next hour convincing my mom that Ryan and I had broken up and that she shouldn't allow him in her home again. I didn't tell her everything. I didn't want to terrify her. But I said enough that she agreed to be careful and call me if he showed up again. For the next week, I barely slept. I stayed at my mom's for a few days, then had a friend stay with me. I documented everything and went back to the police, who finally agreed to contact Ryan with a warning. They couldn't issue a formal restraining order yet, but the officer assured me they had put him on notice. Strangely, after that, the harassment stopped completely. No calls, no sightings, no notes. For 2 weeks, nothing. I should have felt relieved, but the silence was almost more terrifying. What was he planning? Then a friend sent me a screenshot. Ryan was in a relationship on Facebook with someone new. A quick search showed pictures of them together, looking happy. His profile was full of loving comments about his amazing new girlfriend and how she restored his faith in relationships. I felt sick, not from jealousy, but from fear for this woman who had no idea what she was getting into. Using a fake account, I sent her a message warning her about Ryan's behavior. I included specific details that only someone who had dated him would know. I never heard back, and the next day, both her profile and Ryan's had blocked my fake account. It's been 4 months since Ryan seemingly moved on. I haven't seen or heard from him directly, but I still check my locks twice each night. I still look over my shoulder in parking lots. I still vary my routes and keep location sharing on with trusted friends. I still flinch when my phone rings from an unknown number, because I know Ryan. I know the look in his eyes when he stood in my mother's living room. I know he doesn't forget, and I know that somewhere out there, he's either making another woman's life hell, or he's waiting for the right moment to remind me that I never really got away. Story 14. I've worked as a forestry technician at Tongass National Forest in Alaska for 6 years now. Most people can't handle the isolation out here, but I've always preferred it to city life. The wilderness became my home, and I thought I understood its rhythms. I was wrong. What happened last August still makes my hands shake when I think about it. I've debated posting this for months, but I need to get it out of my system. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar and can make sense of what I encountered. It was August 23rd, a Thursday. The weather had been unusually warm for late summer in southeast Alaska, about 60 degrees and sunny, barely any clouds. I remember because I'd been sweating through my standard issue Forest Service shirt all morning, which rarely happens here. My assignment that day was a routine tree survey about 12 miles north of our ranger station. Nothing complicated, just marking diseased trees, documenting wildlife signs, the usual stuff. I'd packed light, just my survey equipment, GPS, radio, lunch, and water. I expected to be back by late afternoon. The hike in was normal. The forest was alive with bird calls, the occasional rustle of small mammals. I spotted a few deer tracks, documented some woodpecker damage on a stand of hemlocks. Nothing out of the ordinary. By noon, I'd made good progress and decided to take a lunch break near this small creek that cuts through an old-growth section. This part of Tongass is incredible. Towering Sitka spruce and western hemlock trees that have been growing for centuries. The forest floor is covered in thick moss that cushions every step. It's usually my favorite place to work. I sat on a fallen log overlooking the creek, unwrapped my sandwich, and took out my notebook to update my findings. The only sounds were the gentle rush of water over rocks and the distant calls of varied thrushes. I remember feeling completely at peace. That's when I heard it. At first, I thought it was a black bear. We get plenty of them, and they usually make themselves known by crashing through underbrush. This sound was similar at first, movement through the brush about 50 yards upstream from where I sat. But something was off about it. The cadence was wrong. The footfalls were too deliberate and heavy, much heavier than a black bear should be. Whole branches were snapping, not just twigs. Even a brown bear doesn't typically make that much noise unless it's charging. I stopped chewing and listened harder. My brain was trying to categorize the sound based on my years of experience. Moose? No, too inconsistent. Bears have a rolling gait you can recognize. This was different. I called out, like we're trained to do when encountering wildlife. "Hey bear, coming through." Usually, animals scatter when they hear a human voice. The noises stopped, completely. The forest went eerily silent. No birds, no nothing, just the sound of the creek. That's when my skin first started crawling. Wildlife doesn't just stop like that. Then the movement started again, but this time it was different. It was coming directly toward me. Whatever it wasn't scared off by my voice. In fact, it seemed to have changed direction specifically to approach me. That's not normal animal behavior, especially not for bears or moose, which typically avoid human contact. I stood up, abandoning my lunch. "Hey, go on, get out of here," I shouted as loud as I could, clapping my hands together sharply. The movement paused again, briefly, then continued, closer, deliberate, pushing through the dense undergrowth. What really got to me was the pattern of movement. It wasn't the 4-beat rhythm of a quadruped. It moved more like something walking upright. 2 feet, heavy feet. I reached for my bear spray, my heart hammering in my chest. The thing was maybe 30 yards away now, still obscured by the thick vegetation. I couldn't see it, but I could track its progress by the way the bushes moved, branches snapped. That's when the smell hit me. In all my years outdoors, I've never encountered anything like it. Sharp and metallic, like old copper pennies, mixed with something sour and organic that made my stomach heave. It wasn't the musky odor of a bear or the general stink of an unwashed human. This was something else entirely. The smell got stronger as whatever it was got closer. 20 yards now. I could hear its breathing. Raspy, uneven. Not like a person catching their breath, but something more wrong. like something that didn't quite know how to breathe properly. I didn't wait to see what was coming through those bushes. Every instinct in my body screamed danger. I grabbed my backpack, leaving my lunch and water bottle behind, and started backing away, never taking my eyes off the moving vegetation. When I'd put about 10 yards between us, I turned and ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. Something primal took over, and I just bolted down the trail like my life depended on it. I ran for what felt like forever, the weight of my pack slamming against my back with each stride. My lungs burned from the exertion. Even through my panic, I kept checking over my shoulder, terrified I'd see whatever was following me. I didn't stop until I'd put at least half a mile between myself and that creek. When I finally paused, bent double and gasping for air, I couldn't hear anything pursuing me. Just my own ragged breathing and the distant calls of birds that had resumed their normal activity. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely operate my radio. I thought about calling it in, but hesitated. What would I say? That I ran from a weird smell and some broken branches? That something walking on 2 legs was stalking me? It sounded ridiculous even to me. I decided to finish my survey in a different section and head back early. The whole time, I kept looking over my shoulder, jumping at every sound. I didn't return to the creek. I couldn't make myself go back there. When I got back to the ranger station that evening, Jim was there. He's been with the Forest Service for over 20 years and knows Tongass better than anyone. I respected him, so despite my better judgment, I told him what happened. I'll never forget his reaction. He looked at me with this mixture of pity and nervousness, like he was dealing with someone becoming unhinged. He nodded along as I described the sounds and the smell, but I could tell he didn't believe me. "Cal," he said after I finished, "isolation can do funny things to your mind out there. Happens to the best of us." I felt my face burn with embarrassment. He thought I was losing it. "Maybe you picked up a parasite or something," he continued, "making you smell things. Or it could have been a young brown bear. They can be curious sometimes. But I know what a bear sounds like, smells like. This wasn't that." Jim must have seen the dejection on my face because he clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Get some rest. You'll feel better in the morning." I didn't argue. What was the point? I went back to my cabin, took the hottest shower I could stand, and tried to convince myself Jim was right. Maybe I was overworked. Maybe the isolation was getting to me after all these years, but I couldn't shake what happened. That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside my window had me sitting bolt upright, listening. The wind against the cabin walls sounded too much like heavy breathing. The creaking of the old wooden structure reminded me of snapping branches. The next morning, I seriously considered quitting, packing up and heading back to civilization. But this job is all I have, and where would I go? So I stayed. In the weeks that followed, I avoided that section of the forest. I volunteered for surveys closer to the ranger station, took on more administrative duties. No one questioned it. They probably thought I was just burnt out. I haven't told anyone else about what happened. Not my coworkers, not my family back in Oregon. How could I? Hey, I ran away from a weird smell and some broken branches. Doesn't exactly make for convincing conversation, but I know what I experienced was real. Something was out there, something that doesn't belong in any wildlife guidebook I've ever studied. It's been 4 months now, and I still haven't returned to that creek. I've plotted different routes for my surveys, taking the long way around if necessary. Sometimes I feel Jim watching me with concern, probably wondering if I'm going to crack completely. The thing that keeps me up at night isn't just the memory of what happened. It's knowing that whatever it was, it's still out there, moving through the ancient forests of Tongass. And sometimes, when I'm alone on a trail and the wind dies down completely, I swear I can catch a faint whiff of that metallic sour smell again. I keep my bear spray closer now. I check over my shoulder more often, and I've started carrying a small voice recorder with me. If I ever hear that distinctive snap thud of something massive moving through the trees again, I want proof. I'm not crazy. I know what I experienced. Something followed me that day in Tongass, something that had no business being there. And the worst part is, I don't think it was just passing through. I think it lives here. And sometimes when I look out my cabin window at night, at the wall of dark trees that surrounds us, I can't shake the feeling that it knows exactly where I am. Story 15. I still get chills thinking about what happened that night at Chick-fil-A. It was a Tuesday evening in October about 5 years ago. I'd only been working there for maybe 3 months, just a part-time gig while I was figuring out what to do with my life after high school. It started like any other closing shift. I'm not gonna lie, I actually enjoyed closing shifts most of the time. The rush would die down after 8, and the last 2 hours were usually pretty chill. Just a few stragglers coming in for late dinners. Our location in Pineville wasn't exactly a hot spot after dark. My manager, Lisa, had assigned me to dining room duty that night. Basic stuff: sweep the floors, wipe down tables, refill condiments, all that boring but necessary stuff. Brian was handling the kitchen cleanup, Alyssa was on register, and Marcus was doing inventory in the back. Nothing unusual. Around 9:15, I was sweeping around the dining area when I first noticed him. There was this guy sitting alone in the far back corner booth, the one partially hidden by that fake plant display. He was dressed all in black with the hood of his sweatshirt pulled up, covering most of his face. His head was down, but he definitely wasn't sleeping. I could see his shoulders moving slightly, like he was breathing heavily or maybe mumbling to himself. I didn't think much of it at first. We get all types, right? Some people just want to sit alone and have their chicken sandwich in peace. I kept sweeping, went back to the kitchen to empty the dustpan, and then started wiping down the empty tables. By 9:45, the dining area had emptied out completely, except for this guy. He hadn't moved at all. Same position, same booth, same hunched posture. His food was barely touched, just a single bite taken out of his sandwich. I started getting that weird feeling in my stomach, you know? That instinctive, something's not right feeling. I mentioned it to Alyssa when I went to get more sanitizer spray. There's this weird dude who's been sitting in the corner for over an hour and hasn't moved. She just shrugged and said, "Probably just homeless or something. We'll kick him out at closing." 10 o'clock finally rolled around. Closing time. Lisa nodded at me to go tell the guy we were closing. No big deal, right? I'd done this plenty of times before. I walked over to his booth, keeping a comfortable distance. "Excuse me, sir. I'm sorry, but we're closing now." Nothing. No response. Not even a twitch to acknowledge I'd spoken. I cleared my throat and tried again, a bit louder this time. "Sir, we're closed now. I need to ask you to leave." Still nothing. The restaurant was completely silent by this point, just the hum of the lights and refrigerators in the background. I took a step closer, feeling my heart starting to beat a little faster. "Sir, can you hear me? We're closed." After what felt like forever, he slowly turned his head toward me. I still couldn't see his face clearly under the hood, but what I could see made my blood run cold. His eyes were bloodshot and wide, staring at me with this intense, unblinking gaze. Then he said, in this deep, gravelly voice that didn't match his appearance at all, "No. Just no." Like I'd asked him if he wanted dessert or something. I was so caught off guard that I actually let out a nervous laugh. "I'm sorry, but we're closed. Everyone has to leave. It's policy." That's when he stood up. And holy shit, this guy was huge. He must have been at least 6'5", maybe 250 pounds. The baggy black clothes had hidden his size while he was sitting. I immediately took a few steps back, feeling my throat go dry. "Sir, please, I don't want any trouble. We just need to close up." He just stood there, completely still, staring at me. I could feel sweat forming on my back. I turned and speed-walked to the kitchen where Brian was finishing up. "Dude," I whispered urgently, "there's this massive guy out there who won't leave. He's freaking me out." Brian, who was maybe 5'10", but thought he was tough because he lifted weights, rolled his eyes. "Seriously, let's go talk to him." When we got back to the dining area, the guy was sitting down again, exactly like before. It was like he'd never moved at all, which somehow made it even creepier. Brian stepped forward, using his manager voice, even though he wasn't a manager. "Sir, we're closed now. You need to leave the premises." The guy didn't move. "Sir," Brian repeated, getting irritated now. "If you don't leave, we'll have to call the police." That's when the man slowly stood up again. This time, he raised his head fully, and I could see his face. He looked normal, I guess, but his expression was completely blank. Not angry, not confused, just empty. He stared directly at Brian and said, "Go ahead, skinny boy." His voice made the hair on my arms stand up. It didn't sound threatening exactly. It was more like he was stating a fact about the weather or something. Brian, trying to save face, got all defensive. "What's your problem, man? Why are you acting like this?" The guy didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then, without warning, he reached for the small flower vase on the table. Just a little plastic thing with a fake daisy that corporate makes us put on every table, and violently smashed it on the floor. The sound echoed through the empty restaurant like a gunshot. "Holy shit," Brian yelped, jumping back. I was already backing away toward the kitchen. As we retreated, the guy shouted something after us that I couldn't quite make out. Something about all of you and watching. I'm not even sure if I heard him right because my heart was pounding so loud in my ears. We practically ran back to the kitchen where Alyssa and Marcus were finishing up. Lisa had already left for the night, leaving Brian as the senior employee. "Call the cops," I told Alyssa, my voice shaking. "There's some psycho in the dining room who's smashing stuff and won't leave." Marcus peeked through the kitchen window. "Oh shit, I see him. What the hell is his problem?" Brian was already on his phone with 911, explaining the situation. While he was talking, we heard more crashing from the dining area. "We need to get out of here," Alyssa whispered. "What if he has a weapon or something?" None of us wanted to argue with that logic. We quickly grabbed our stuff and headed for the back exit, making sure to lock the kitchen door behind us. The employee exit led to the back parking lot where our cars were. Once outside, we huddled by Brian's car, waiting for the police. It was a cold night, and I remember shivering, partly from the temperature, partly from adrenaline. We could see the front of the restaurant from where we stood, but the dining area lights had been dimmed for closing, so we couldn't see much movement inside. The police arrived in about 7 minutes. 2 patrol cars with lights flashing but no sirens. 4 officers got out, and Brian explained what was happening. 2 officers went to the front entrance, while the others circled around to cover the side exit. We watched as they entered the restaurant, hands on their holsters. The next 20 minutes were the longest of my life. We could see flashlight beams moving inside, but not much else. Finally, 3 officers emerged from the front doors, struggling with the man in black. It took all 3 of them to control him. He was thrashing and twisting, but eerily not making any sound. No screaming, no cursing, nothing. They managed to get him cuffed and into the back of a patrol car. The 4th officer came over to us and explained that the guy had refused to comply with their orders and had actually tried to tackle one of the officers when they approached him. They found no ID on him, and he wouldn't say a word to them after being detained. After giving our statements, we were allowed back inside to finish closing. The dining area was a mess, not just from the vase he broke, but he'd also flipped over 2 tables and smeared what looked like ketchup on one of the walls. In the booth where he'd been sitting, we found his barely touched sandwich and something that still gives me nightmares, a small notebook with page after page of just our restaurant's address, written over and over again in tiny, meticulous handwriting. The police took the notebook as evidence. They told us later that the guy was apparently homeless with a history of mental health issues. He'd been picked up for similar incidents at other businesses around town. I quit that job 2 weeks later. I told myself it was because I found something that paid better, but honestly, I couldn't shake the image of that man's empty eyes staring at me, or the way he said no, like he was refusing to acknowledge the basic rules that the rest of us live by. Sometimes I drive past that Chick-fil-A on my way to work, and I always get that sick feeling in my stomach when I see that corner booth. I still wonder what would have happened if we hadn't called the police, or if we'd been alone that night. I've never felt so strongly that I was in the presence of someone completely disconnected from reality, someone capable of anything. Story 16. I still have trouble sleeping sometimes, thinking about what happened during our camping trip 5 years ago. I've never written about this before, but I think I need to get it off my chest. My buddy Chris and I had been friends since elementary school. We both grew up in the same neighborhood in Ottawa and shared this obsession with outdoor survival. We'd watch all those wilderness shows together as teenagers and always talked about doing something extreme one day. When we turned 24, we finally decided to do what we called a hardcore camping trip. 7 days in Algonquin Provincial Park with minimal supplies. Just basic camping gear, limited food, fishing equipment, and the plan to live off the land as much as possible. We were young and stupid and thought we were invincible. Looking back now, I realize how dangerous it was to go that deep into the wilderness with our limited experience. We packed our backpacks with just enough supplies to not die. Water purification tablets, emergency rations, basic first aid, sleeping bags, a small tent, some fishing gear, and a few other essentials. The plan was to hike deep into the backcountry, away from the regular camping areas, and survive mostly by fishing and foraging. The first 3 days were incredible. Tough as hell, but incredible. We hiked further than we'd anticipated, following game trails and using our compass to maintain a general northeasterly direction. By day 3, we'd caught several fish and even managed to collect some wild berries. We were sore, slightly undernourished, and hadn't properly showered, but we felt alive. On the 4th day, things changed. We'd hiked for about 5 hours when the forest started to feel different. The trees grew closer together, blocking more sunlight, and there was this weird quietness. No birds, no rustling in the underbrush. I remember thinking it was strange, but didn't say anything to Chris at the time. Around mid-afternoon, we came across a small clearing, and there it was, an old wooden church, just sitting there in the middle of nowhere, miles from any road or settlement. It looked completely out of place, like something from an old black and white photograph had been dropped into the forest. "What the hell?" Chris said, stopping dead in his tracks. I pulled out our park map, checking to see if there was any indication of a structure in this area. Nothing. According to the map, we were in the middle of uninterrupted wilderness. The church wasn't very big, maybe 30 feet long and 20 feet wide. The wood was weathered gray, and parts of the roof were caving in. There was a small bell tower, but the bell was missing. No windows, just empty frames where glass should have been. The place looked like it had been abandoned for decades. We approached cautiously. The main door was secured with a heavy padlock that was rusted but still intact. Chris walked around the perimeter, and I followed. On the far side, we found a hole in the wall about 3 feet across, where some of the wooden planks had rotted away. "Should we check it out?" Chris asked, already crouching down to look inside. Every instinct told me we shouldn't, but curiosity got the better of me. "I guess a quick look won't hurt." Chris went first, crawling through the hole. I hesitated for a few seconds before following him. The interior was dark, and it took a moment for my eyes to adjust. The floor was wooden and creaked under our weight. The air inside felt heavy and stale, with a musty smell that made me want to gag. The church was completely empty. No pews, no altar, nothing except a large wooden cross hanging on the far wall. The inside walls were bare wood, no decoration or paint. Sunlight streamed through the empty window frames and holes in the roof, creating patches of light on the dusty floor. And then there was the trap door. It was in the center of the room, a square steel door set into the wooden floor, about 3 feet by 3 feet. Heavy chains crisscrossed over it, secured with not one but 3 large padlocks. "Holy shit," Chris whispered, walking slowly toward it. "What do you think is down there?" I hung back, feeling increasingly uneasy. Nothing good. Why else would someone chain it up like that? Chris crouched down next to the trap door, examining the chains and locks. "These locks are newer than the building," he said, looking up at me with excitement in his eyes. "Someone's been maintaining this. There must be something valuable down there." That's when I noticed the change in his demeanor. His eyes had this weird intensity, and he started speaking faster. In all the years I'd known Chris, I'd never seen him like this. "We need to open it," he said, tugging at one of the chains. "Are you insane? We're not breaking into some random underground chamber in the middle of nowhere." Chris wasn't listening. He was running his hands over the padlocks, testing their strength. "I bet I could break these with a rock, or maybe we could pry them off." "Chris, seriously, let's go. This place is creeping me out." He looked up at me, and for a second, I didn't recognize my friend. His expression was almost feverish. "Don't you want to know what's down there? It could be anything. Old church relics, maybe gold, or..." He trailed off, a strange smile forming on his face. "Or what? Bodies? This isn't a treasure hunt, Chris. This is someone's property, and they clearly don't want people going down there." He stood up suddenly. "I'm opening it. Help me find something to break these locks." I grabbed his arm as he started toward the exit. "No, we're leaving. Now!" He yanked his arm free with surprising strength. "What's wrong with you? Don't you see what we've found?" "What we've found is someone's private property that we're trespassing on. And frankly, this whole situation is weird as hell." Chris just stared at me for a moment, then turned and walked outside. I followed, relieved he was finally leaving, but when I got outside, I saw him picking up a large rock. "Chris, stop. This isn't like you." He ignored me, walking back toward the hole in the wall with the rock. I stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "Move," he said, his voice low and threatening. "No, we're packing up and getting out of here." What happened next still haunts me. Chris shoved me hard, causing me to stumble backward and fall. Before I could get up, he was on top of me, pinning me down. His eyes were wild, pupils dilated. "You don't understand," he hissed. "I need to see what's down there." I managed to push him off and scramble to my feet. "What the hell is wrong with you? Listen to yourself." He stood there, rock still in hand, breathing heavily. For a terrifying moment, I thought he might actually hit me with it. Then something changed. The manic energy seemed to drain from him all at once, and his expression shifted to one of confusion. He looked at the rock in his hand as if wondering how it got there. What am I doing?" "You tell me. You just attacked me because I wouldn't let you break into some underground chamber in an abandoned church." Chris dropped the rock and sat down heavily on the ground. "I don't know what came over me. I felt like I needed to open that trap door, like something was calling me." He looked up at me, genuinely confused and a little scared. "That's not normal, is it?" "No, it's not, and I think we should get the hell out of here." We grabbed our backpacks, which we dropped at the edge of the clearing, and left immediately. We hiked for hours, barely speaking, just trying to put as much distance between us and the church as possible. We finally made camp as darkness fell, setting up our tent in silence. That night, huddled in our sleeping bags, Chris finally spoke. "I'm sorry about what happened back there. I don't know what came over me." "It's okay," I said, though it wasn't. "Let's just forget about it." But we couldn't forget about it. The incident cast a shadow over the rest of our trip. We cut our journey short, heading back after just 5 days instead of the planned 7. The adventure had lost its appeal. In the months that followed, we tried to joke about it. "Remember your obsession with the cellar stash?" I'd say, and Chris would laugh uncomfortably. But beneath the jokes was a tension that never quite went away. We've never gone back to that part of Algonquin. Chris seems to have put it behind him, but I can't. I keep thinking about that church, that trap door, and what might be beneath it. Sometimes I dream about it. Dreams where I'm the one frantically trying to break the locks, driven by an irresistible need to see what's below. I've searched online for information about abandoned churches in Algonquin Provincial Park, but found nothing. I've even contemplated contacting park authorities, but always stop myself, worried they'll think I'm crazy. What haunts me most is the change I saw in Chris. He's my oldest friend, someone I know better than almost anyone, and for those few minutes, he became a stranger, possessed by something I couldn't understand. I don't believe in the supernatural, at least I didn't before, but I can't shake the feeling that we encountered something malevolent that day, something that reached out and briefly took hold of my friend's mind. Sometimes I wonder if I should go back, alone, and try to find that church again, to see if it's still there, or if it was just some strange, shared hallucination. But then I remember Chris's face, that terrible intensity in his eyes, and I know I never want to see that place again. Whatever lies beneath that chained trapdoor, I hope it stays there forever. Story 17. I still can't sleep through the night. It's been 44 years since that summer in '79, but I wake up sweating, hearing rustling outside my bedroom that isn't really there. My therapist says writing about it might help, so here goes. I've never shared the full story online before. Mark, Joey, and I had been friends since high school. By 79, we were all 23, working dead-end jobs in Cambridge. Me at a print shop, Joey at his dad's hardware store, and Mark delivering appliances. That summer was brutally hot, and we were all feeling stuck. Mark was the one who suggested getting away for a week. "Let's go camping at Harold Parker," he said while we were having beers at my place one Friday. "Get away from this city heat." Harold Parker State Forest was only about 40 minutes north, but it felt like another world. 3,000 acres of woods, ponds, and trails. We'd been there a couple times in high school, but never for more than a day trip. Joey was immediately on board. I was hesitant. I'd been saving up for a used car, but they convinced me. "Come on, man," Joey said. "When's the last time we did anything besides work and drink?" He had a point. We packed up my beat-up Chevy Nova on a Monday morning in late July. The trunk and back seat were stuffed with our gear, a 6-person tent, way bigger than we needed, but it was Joey's dad's. 3 sleeping bags, a cooler full of cheap beer and hot dogs, and whatever camping supplies we could cobble together. Mark brought his dad's old Coleman stove, though we planned to mostly cook over the fire. The drive up was nothing special. Windows down, radio blasting Zeppelin, smoking cigarettes and talking shit about our jobs. Normal stuff. We were so excited about a simple camping trip, like we were escaping prison instead of just taking a week off work. We got to the forest around 11 that morning. The ranger at the entrance gave us a map and pointed us toward a spot near Berry Pond. "Not too many folks out there this week," he said. "You boys should have a nice quiet time." If I could go back to that moment, I'd turn the car around and drive straight home. We found our spot and spent the afternoon setting up camp. The tent was a pain in the ass to put up. Took us almost an hour of cursing and fumbling with poles. But we finally got it. Made a fire pit with some rocks, unpacked our stuff, and cracked open beers to celebrate. The spot was perfect, about 50 yards from the pond, surrounded by tall pines with a small clearing for our tent and fire. That first night we sat around the campfire eating hot dogs and beans straight from the can. The stars were incredible. You don't see stars like that in the city. We got pretty drunk, told ghost stories like we were kids again, and crashed in the tent around midnight. The first 2 days were exactly what we needed. We hiked some trails, swam in the pond, napped in the afternoon sun. Mark caught a few small bass, which we cooked over the fire. We talked about girls, cars, music, normal stuff. On the second night, we ran into a couple guys from Andover at the main camping area when we went to refill our water jugs. They joined us for a few beers, but left before dark. That was the last time we saw anyone else. The third day was hot, like 95 degrees hot. We spent most of it in the pond, coming out only to eat and drink. By evening, we were sunburned, buzzed, and exhausted. We turned in early, around 10, all 3 of us piling into the tent. I remember Joey complaining about Mark's snoring, throwing a wadded-up t-shirt at him before we all fell asleep. I woke up needing to piss around, I don't know, maybe 3 in the morning. The tent was dark, but there was bright moonlight filtering through the nylon. I fumbled for my flashlight and noticed right away that Mark wasn't in his sleeping bag. The tent flap was unzipped about halfway. I figured he'd gone to take a leak too. I crawled out, did my business against a tree near the tent, and called out quietly, "Mark, you out here?" Nothing but crickets and frogs from the pond. I shined my flashlight around the campsite. The fire was down to embers. Mark's boots were still by the tent entrance where he'd left them. That struck me as weird. The ground was rough with pine needles and rocks. No one would walk around barefoot at night. A little concerned, I went back in and shook Joey awake. "Joey, Mark's not here." He groaned and rolled over. "Probably taking a dump, man. Go back to sleep. His shoes are still here, and he's been gone a while." That got Joey's attention. He sat up, rubbing his eyes. "What time is it?" "Around 3, I think." We both called out for Mark from the tent entrance. When we got no answer, we grabbed our flashlights and boots and started looking around the campsite. That's when I spotted it. Mark's baseball cap hanging on a low branch about 20 yards from our tent, in the direction leading away from the pond. It was his Red Sox cap, the one he always wore. I called Joey over. "Maybe he's sleepwalking," Joey suggested, but his voice was tight. We followed the direction of the cap, sweeping our flashlights through the trees. About 30 yards further, we found one of Mark's socks. Then another sock maybe 50 feet beyond that. "Mark!" Joey yelled, no longer caring about keeping quiet. "This isn't funny, man." I was getting that feeling, that cold, sinking feeling in my gut that something was very wrong. We kept walking, following what was becoming a trail of Mark's clothes. His jeans were draped over a fallen log. His t-shirt was found 50 yards further, snagged on a thorn bush. His boxers were the last piece, hanging from a branch at eye level, like they'd been placed there deliberately. Joey was breathing hard next to me. "What the fuck is this? Is he messing with us?" I didn't answer. My flashlight beam was bouncing all over as my hand shook. We were now maybe a quarter mile from our campsite, in a part of the forest we hadn't explored. The path widened slightly into a small clearing, and that's when my light caught something pale against the dark forest floor. I'll never forget that moment, the way the flashlight beam illuminated Mark's bare legs first, then torso. Joey saw it too and rushed forward before I could stop him. "Mark! Hey, Mark!" I followed, my feet feeling like they were moving through mud. When my light reached the upper part of the body, I dropped to my knees and vomited. Mark was lying on his back, arms spread out like he was making a snow angel. But where his head should have been, there was nothing. Just a ragged, torn neck ending in a dark, glistening stump. Joey's scream echoed through the forest. I couldn't move, couldn't think. Joey grabbed my shoulder, pulling me up, both of us stumbling backward. We gotta go," he kept saying, his voice high-pitched and breaking. I don't remember much about running back to the campsite. We fell several times, scratched ourselves on branches, completely panicked. When we got back, Joey wanted to pack up and drive, away immediately, but I somehow knew we needed to get help. "We have to tell the rangers," I insisted, my voice not sounding like my own. "We can't just leave him out there." It took us almost an hour to find the ranger station in the dark. The night ranger, an older guy named Bill, thought we were drunk or high at first, but something in our faces must have convinced him. He radioed for backup and got on his CB to call the police. The sun was coming up by the time we led a group of rangers and 2 state policemen back to where we'd found Mark. I'll never forget the silence when they all saw the body, the way one of the younger rangers turned away and retched into the bushes. What followed was a nightmare that hasn't ended. We were separated and questioned for hours. Of course, we were the prime suspects. Our campsite was taped off as a crime scene. They took our clothes, our fingerprints, photographs of scratches on our arms from running through the woods. They searched the entire forest but never found Mark's head. After 3 days of interrogation, forensics started clearing us. The coroner determined that whatever had removed Mark's head had done it with strength no human possesses. The vertebrae weren't cut, they were wrenched apart. There were no defensive wounds on his body, no signs of a struggle at the campsite, and there were unidentified animal hairs on his body that they couldn't match to any known species in the forest. We were released after a week, but the investigation continued for months. They eventually ruled it an animal attack, though no one could explain how an animal removed Mark's clothes piece by piece, hanging them on branches in a trail, or how it could have severed his head so completely without leaving any other claw or bite marks on his body. The case went cold. Mark's parents were destroyed, not just losing their son, but never being able to bury him whole. I think his mom still believed Joey and I had something to do with it. Joey moved to Oregon 6 months later. We tried to stay in touch, but talking to each other just brought it all back. Last I heard, he was working on a fishing boat, still single, still running. I spiraled pretty hard. Lost my job, started drinking too much. My girlfriend at the time, Lisa, tried to stick by me, but eventually left when I couldn't stop having nightmares, couldn't stop checking the locks 3-4 times a night. I'd wake up screaming, thinking I could hear something outside my apartment window. It took years of therapy to function again. I'm 67 now, with a decent job as a building manager. Never married though, never got past what happened. Every summer, when July rolls around, I start having the dreams again, walking through woods, following a trail of my own clothes, knowing what waits at the end, but unable to stop walking. I've researched similar cases over the years. There are stories from those woods going back to the 40s, hikers gone missing, strange animal sightings, unexplained lights. Nothing exactly like what happened to Mark, but enough to make me wonder. I've never gone camping again, never even been in woods at night. Some part of me is still in Harold Parker Forest, still running through the trees with Joey, still finding my friend's headless body in that moonlit clearing. That part will never leave those woods. Sometimes I think whatever took Mark wanted us to find him like that, wanted us to follow that trail of clothes, wanted us to see, not to kill us, but to make sure we'd never really live again either. I haven't told anyone this in years, but lately I've been seeing a Red Sox cap hanging on branches when I walk home at night. Just glimpses out of the corner of my eye. When I turn to look, it's gone. Maybe I'm finally losing it completely, or maybe whatever it was isn't finished with us yet. If you're planning a camping trip to Harold Parker, do yourself a favor. Go somewhere else. Story 18. I still have trouble sleeping sometimes after what happened back in 1995. I was 23 years old, working security at Northern Heights Mall in Ohio. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it paid the bills while I finished my associate's degree. The mall itself was one of those aging complexes from the 70s, 3 floors of increasingly vacant retail space with this massive warehouse section in the back that connected to the loading docks. The place was a complete maze, especially the back areas that customers never saw. Looking back, I should have picked up on the warning signs much earlier. The first incident happened in early March. I was doing my usual rounds through the service corridors when I found this black duffel bag tucked behind the emergency exit door near the food court. Nothing special about it, just a plain black gym bag. I figured some employee had forgotten it, so I took it to the security office to log it in the lost and found. When I unzipped it, the smell hit me immediately. Inside were balled-up clothes, mostly black t-shirts, socks, and underwear that reeked like they hadn't been washed in months. Mixed in were empty snack wrappers and a few plastic bottles. I remember thinking it was weird, but I just documented it and stashed it away. 2 weeks later, I found another identical duffel, this time in the janitorial closet near the west entrance. Same black bag, same foul smell, same assortment of black clothing. The weird part? Some of the clothes were damp, like they'd been recently washed in a sink. When the third bag turned up in mid-April behind a row of vending machines, I finally mentioned it to my supervisor, Frank. "Probably just some homeless guy using the mall bathrooms to clean up," he said with a shrug. "Keep an eye out, but don't stress about it. Just toss the stuff if you find more." I didn't toss them, though. Something felt off about the whole situation. I kept all 3 bags in our storage room, documenting when and where I'd found each one. The 4th bag appeared in early May inside an unused storage closet in the basement level, and that's when my uneasiness turned into legitimate concern. This time, along with the clothes, there was a flashlight, a tattered map of the mall's layout, the kind they give out at the information desk, and a half-used roll of duct tape. I realized we weren't dealing with someone who occasionally snuck in to wash up. Someone was systematically moving around inside the building. Our mall had an outdated security system. Most of the cameras only covered main corridors and entrances, leaving huge blind spots throughout the building. The old service tunnels, maintenance areas, and some of the storage rooms had no coverage at all. I started paying closer attention during my night shifts, listening for noises that didn't belong and checking doors that should have been locked. On May 15th, a Monday night, everything changed. The mall closed at 9, and by 10:30, I'd finished my first round of checks. Everything seemed normal. Stores locked up, lights dimmed, the usual quiet that settles over an empty mall. I decided to do a thorough inspection of the warehouse area, something we only did a couple times a week since it was such a massive space. The warehouse was this sprawling section behind the mall, rows of metal shelving units stacked with seasonal decorations, spare fixtures, and merchandise storage for the larger stores. The ceiling was easily 20 feet high, with a network of pipes and ventilation ducts running across it. The lighting was terrible, just fluorescent tubes spaced too far apart, creating these pockets of shadow between the rows. I was about halfway through the warehouse when I spotted something unusual between 2 shelving units, a structure made of cardboard boxes that had been taped together to form a sort of hideaway. The boxes were arranged in a way that made them blend in with the regular storage, but once I noticed the pattern, it was unmistakable. Someone had built a shelter. My heart started pounding as I approached. I unclipped my flashlight and shined it into the structure. Inside was what I can only describe as a nest. 2 sleeping bags laid out on flattened cardboard, surrounded by piles of those same generic black clothes I'd found in the duffel bags. There were dozens of food wrappers, mostly from the mall food court, and about 20 empty water bottles neatly arranged in a row. The most disturbing part was how organized it was. This wasn't some desperate person who'd snuck in for a night's shelter. This was someone who had been living here for a while, methodically, carefully. Against one wall of boxes was a stack of magazines taken from the mall bookstore. Next to that was a collection of half-used soap bottles and shampoos, probably taken from the mall bathrooms. I stood there frozen, trying to process what I was seeing, when suddenly the overhead lights went out. Not all at once. They clicked off in sequence, row by row, moving from the front of the warehouse toward where I stood. Someone was at the breaker panel, systematically shutting down sections of the warehouse. That's when I heard the footsteps, fast, light steps, moving between the shelves, coming straight toward me. I fumbled with my radio to call for backup, but before I could press the talk button, a figure burst out from behind a shelf and slammed into me with surprising force. I caught only a glimpse, scrawny but strong, dressed entirely in black with greasy hair hanging over a pale face. The impact knocked me back against one of the metal shelving units, sending a jolt of pain through my shoulder. My flashlight clattered to the ground, its beam spinning wildly across the floor and walls. By the time I regained my balance, the figure was already sprinting away, weaving through the shelving units with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where they were going, even in near darkness. I shouted for them to stop, but that only made them run faster. I gave chase, following the sound of their retreating footsteps. The warehouse connected to the mall through a long corridor that led to the service areas behind the stores. The person was heading straight for that corridor, clearly familiar with the layout. My shoulder throbbed where I'd hit the shelf, but adrenaline kept me moving. I followed them into the mall service corridor, catching glimpses of their silhouette as they darted through patches of emergency lighting. They were moving with purpose, taking turns without hesitation. The chase led me to the public restrooms near the west entrance. I heard a door slam and rushed inside the men's room, my handgun drawn now, though my hands were shaking. The bathroom appeared empty, but one of the stalls was closed. I approached carefully, calling out that I was security and they needed to come out immediately. No response. I pushed the stall door open with my foot, expecting to find the intruder, but the stall was empty. That's when I noticed the ceiling. The ventilation grate above the stall had been removed and pushed aside. Whoever it was had climbed into the ventilation system. And then I saw the message. Written on the bathroom mirror in black Sharpie were the words, "F off and eat poop," in crude, angry letters. It wasn't just the childish message that disturbed me. It was knowing this person had taken the time to write it while I was just seconds behind them. They weren't panicked, they were playing with me. I called the police immediately. Within 20 minutes, 3 officers arrived, and I walked them through everything: the duffel bags, the nest in the warehouse, the chase, and the message on the mirror. They took it seriously, especially after seeing the elaborate hideout in the warehouse. What followed was the most disturbing part of the whole ordeal. As the police began a systematic search of the building, they discovered it wasn't just one nest. They found 5 separate living spaces throughout the mall. One was tucked into a dead-end maintenance corridor. Another was inside a large ventilation junction box. The worst was a small space they found above the ceiling tiles in the women's dressing room at one of the department stores, where they discovered a collection of food wrappers and a hole that had been carefully cut to provide a view into the changing area below. The police brought in more officers and began a full sweep of every inch of the building, including all the ventilation ducts and ceiling spaces. Despite their efforts, they never found the person that night. They collected evidence from each site: fingerprints, hair samples, the duffel bags I'd saved. The consensus was that someone had been living inside the mall for at least several months, possibly longer. The mall was closed for 2 days while they completed their investigation. Every lock in the building was changed. Security protocols were completely overhauled. We installed motion sensors in all the back areas and sealed up many of the larger ventilation ducts with metal grates that couldn't be removed without special tools. For weeks afterward, I jumped at every sound during my shifts. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I'd look up at the ceiling vents and wonder if someone was up there staring down at me. I started having nightmares about being chased through endless mall corridors by a shadowy figure. I quit that job 3 months later. Couldn't handle it anymore. The mall installed a much better security system after the incident, but the damage was done for me. I couldn't walk those halls without constantly looking over my shoulder. I tried to put the whole thing behind me, and for the most part, I succeeded. Life moved on. I finished my degree, got a better job, started a family. The incident became just a weird story I occasionally told at parties, leaving out how much it had actually affected me. Then, almost 11 years later, in 2006, I was browsing the local newspaper when a small article caught my eye. A man had been arrested for stalking and conspiracy to kidnap. The details were sparse, but there was a mugshot. I nearly dropped my coffee when I saw the face. Older now, but unmistakable. The same greasy hair, the same hollow eyes. It was him, the person who had charged at me in that warehouse. According to the article, he had been living in the crawl space of an apartment building, spying on residents through holes he'd drilled in their bathroom ceilings. The police had found notebooks where he'd recorded their daily routines, along with disturbing plans to abduct one of the women. The article mentioned he had a history of similar behavior, including previously residing in commercial buildings without detection. It didn't specifically mention the mall, but I knew it was him. What haunts me most isn't the chase or even the confrontation. It's all the time before that. All those months I worked there doing my rounds, never knowing there was someone watching from the shadows, from inside the walls, from above the ceiling. Someone who knew the building better than I did. Someone who might have been watching me, tracking my patterns, laughing as I walked right past their hiding spots night after night. I think about all the people who used those dressing rooms and bathrooms while he watched. All the late-night employees who worked alone, never knowing someone was there in the darkness with them. And I wonder how many other places he's infiltrated over the years. How many other buildings might still harbor someone like him, living within their walls, watching and waiting.